Alright, before I say anything, to give you an idea as to how far I personally am in the story, I am fully caught up to chapter 1088, which at the time of recording is the most recently released chapter. But other than a handful of things, I won't be mentioning anything in Egghead since it's still ongoing and there's nothing so far that I felt was important enough to talk about, other than Ooga Booga, Nami and Robin's outfits make my pee-pee hard. So everything discussed in this video will be to the end of Wano. I say this as a general spoiler warning for anyone who hasn't gotten that far, also because I know that every chapter Oda is releasing right now essentially changes everything that's been established so far, and I figured making this video after Wano gives it a solid point of reference because otherwise I would never be able to make this video with how drastically the story is evolving. And if you're interested in One Piece but don't like reading manga, and you've heard all the horror stories about how the anime is getting worse after X arc, and I've had people unironically recommend for you to start over from chapter 1 when you asked where Marineford left off in the manga, or to switch between both versions for certain scenes, and you don't feel like watching anime with a separate tab open for a filler guide, there is a fan-edited, manga-accurate version of One Piece called One Pace. It is done by an extremely talented team, and it completely eliminates all of the unnecessary filler and pacing issues that Toei ruins the anime with, and vastly speeds up the process of watching One Piece. The anime isn't as bad early on since there is still enough material, but later on after Timeskip, everything slows down and it is painful. To give you an idea as to how much time you save, in the original anime, Dressrosa is 118 episodes, while in One Pace, it's 48. They cut out 70 fucking episodes worth of garbage. But with that out of the way, for the longest time, One Piece was always that one anime I told myself that I'd never watch. Not for any justified reason, but as an outsider looking in at it, I saw 1,000 plus episodes of a show, and I thought, how could I possibly ever care about anything that long? In the time it takes me to finish a single arc, I could have finished like 13 episode shows, which is still true, but there's a reason One Piece is as popular as it is. A reason why it's remained an ever-relevant part of the anime/manga community for over 20 years. And what is that reason? A mod. That's the reason. But in this video, I'm not going to be going into what I think that reason is or summarizing the entire story. We're just going to pick different aspects or moments of One Piece that I wanted to discuss, because for the last 4 months, the funny rubberman has taken over the very fabric of my being, and because One Piece is a very emotional and rich story that everyone should experience with so many great character moments and some of the best world building you'll ever see. And yes, the bazooka can turn into a dog that shoots baseball bombs, and one of the main characters is a reindeer doctor named Tony, but just shut up, it's good. Now let's start at East Blue, as going through this series chronologically makes the most sense when discussing it, and also because East Blue is a really interesting point in One Piece because it's the only part of the story that feels the way it does. It has a much more different tone than anything after it, and a sort of part of that is, with the exception of Loketown and Baratier, the islands they go to are all your traditional old-timey villages and sea outposts, and this is a far cry from the sprawling and larger-than-life islands we go to later on, where literally the sky is the limit. Like, I mean, yeah, fuck it, why not have a whale tree on an elephant? In that traditional setting with pirates that have anime powers, makes those early East Blue arcs all essentially feel like a treasure island on crack. And while I can kind of appreciate that now because it's charming to see the Straw Hats' hometowns because of nostalgia, unfortunately, at least all the islands in the beginning feeling and looking very similar. I mean, just look at Sierra Village and Orangetown, they're practically identical. Just because of the beginning of the story and things are meant to be simple doesn't mean they also have to be boring. Not knowing what crazy new island we're going to really plays a part in establishing One Piece's sense of adventure later on in the series. And that sense of adventure is one of the series' biggest strengths. Of all 8 villains in East Blue, only 2 of them are actually good as villains. Buggy is funny, and I like it when he goes, but he's mostly just comic relief, let's be real. And only 4 of the villains in East Blue appear later on in the story after their first appearances, which are Buggy, Alvida, I mean, kind of, honestly, who cares, Arlong, and Smoker, who I love and is done so dirty because he gets nerfed later on since his main thing was being a Logia user, which at that point in the story, nobody could counter. But now we're in the new world and everyone has Haki, and he's a smoke Logia, but without any of the offense that comes with smoke. But when the first 68 chapters of your manga has the most back-to-back lackluster and forgettable villains and settings, it's hard for a first-time reader to get invested in the story. I felt that way when I sat in a Barnes & Noble for 3 hours in summer 2021 and first read One Piece, and I still feel that way now that I'm caught up. When you know that there's over 1,000 more chapters, and you've just had to put up with Captain Kuro and Don Krieg back-to-back, that feeling is enough to kill a man. And I know there's significant moments in early East Blue like Zoro getting caught by Mihawk and basically nothing else, but all of East Blue is only 100 chapters, and in my opinion, it only starts to shine at Arlong Park, which is 68 chapters in. So essentially, 70% of it is meh, and the last 30% of it, which is Arlong Park and Loketown, really hit and show off what One Piece is capable of. And also, 100 chapters is the same length as some manga. A fucking Attack on Titan is 132 chapters. In the time it takes you to get past the setup arcs of One Piece, you could get near the end of Attack on Titan. The core One Piece recipe was still the same as it is now. We go to an island, fight a bad guy, then get a little boo-hoo moment and move on. But the ingredients being used just aren't as good as they are later on. From Arlong Park onwards, we got Sanji cooking up the arc, and before then we got this motherfucker. Arlong Park is really where Weast Blue and One Piece in general shines, to an unbelievable extent. Like, it shines so ridiculously bright that it makes you think, wow, what the fuck was I reading before this? None of the previous villains held any personal threat or connection for the main characters. With Buggy's connection to Shanks and Captain Kuro being in the skies for 3 years, it wasn't as if those two were an active threat to Luffy and Usopp respectively before the events of the arc. Like everyone else up to this point, they're introduced and dropped within the same arc. But Arlong's something that's been part of Nami's life for 8 years, and he's been indirectly foreshadowed up until this point by Nami saying that she hates pirates. We are dealing with 8 whole years of oppression and suffering under Arlong and Kokoyashi village. The emotional and psychological impact this has had on the village cannot be understated. Nami and everyone in the village truly believe it's hopeless to stand up to Arlong. We can see this when she's warning the crew to leave the island, telling them that there's no hope and Arlong and his crew are too strong. When he first invaded, everyone tried to fight back lost, and upon seeing Bellamere fight back, she was effortlessly beaten by Arlong, and he made it a point to demonstrate to Nami just how hopeless it is for her to call for help by showing her how easily he could sink 5 marine ships, crushing any hope of salvation for her, and instilling this deeply rooted terror into her when she was just 10 years old. And all of that genuinely helps to establish Arlong as this terrifying presence in Nami's life, and all that time she had to deal with it by herself, because she's seen full well that asking other people for help only gets them killed. For 8 years, she's been forced to deal with working for someone she hates, unable to rebel against him, and just when the finish line of 100 million berries is within sight, we see Marines come and steal Nami's money and ruin everything she's worked for in those 8 years. And then we learn that the one hope that Nami has been holding out for that's put her in constant dangerous situations turned out to be completely false. And all this time, she was just being used to draw maps, and Arlong never had any intention of letting her go. And you're probably wondering why I'm harping so much on how badly the world fucked Nami over. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because it makes the moment where she finally asked Luffy for help so impactful. This is the first time in all 8 years of being forced to work for Arlong that Nami has not just allowed, but explicitly asked someone for help, and is after she has lost literally everything. And then we get one of many emotional moments in early One Piece where Luffy gives Nami his hat, which is a very deep and symbolic moment, as his hat is his treasure and Luffy doesn't trust anybody with his straw hat. And then in Wano, he proceeds to give it to a little girl who gave him rice a couple hours ago, which really says a lot about his character. I absolutely love how this moment isn't a cliched act of love between Luffy and Nami, and it's simply just a deep platonic caring that he has for her. Because I'll be real with you, I'm fucking sick of romance being in everything I see and read. It's annoying, especially in anime, to see female characters only ever being used for romance and never having any personality outside of which one of the main characters do they like. It's so predictable that I can watch a show and immediately tell who's gonna end up with who. There isn't enough anime or media in general where men and women are just friends with nothing romantic attached. I really wanted to bring up Arlong Park to show on the rest of Weast Blue before, because oh my god, when revisiting the early parts of One Piece and making this video, I didn't realize just how dog shit everything before then was, and how it's just not even close when it comes to quality. It's one thing to remember a story and look back on it fondly, but going back to Weast Blue, I've realized that all my personal favorite moments from it, like Sanji's backstory and Zoro versus Mihawk, or Zoro testing the cursed sword, or basically the entirety of Loguetown because of oddly cozy arc, and the scene where they all put their feet on the barrel and say their dreams, all happened a decent chunk into the saga. And also because Arlong Park is one of my favorite Zoro outfits. The one sword and the Hawaiian shirt with bandages goes so hard. And then we get into the Alrabasta saga, and I really want to take a second to reflect and appreciate just how well the Grand Line was built up at this point in the story, as this scary but exciting stretch of ocean where anything is possible. Just to enter the Grand Line, the crew end up in the calm belt where there's no winds or currents, and then get attacked by sea monsters, and then they go up a mountain that goes in reverse, where if you're off by even a few feet, you die. Then they come on the other side of the mountain and see a giant ass whale, and then after that, on the way to Whiskey Peak, they get confronted by all these sporadic weather patterns and currents, and it really feels like the Grand Line is this dangerous place where you constantly have to be aware and adapt to a whole new set of rules and throw common sense out the window. The ocean itself felt like its own character, but now that isn't really part of the story anymore. When the New World was first shown and it was said that it makes the first half of the Grand Line look like paradise, I was hoping for a return to that, since it's the sea which has all of the strongest pirates, and which also has the final island that nobody has gotten to in 800 years except Roger. But after the initial bit of Kid's crew getting nay-nayed, it eventually just becomes water. Yeah, the islands like Zo and Wano are awkward to get to, but not any more awkward than those in the Grand Line. How is Skypieeiaugh an island in paradise, but Dressrosa isn't, when Dressrosa is infinitely easier to get to? Also, this first part of the Grand Line gave us this moment which is Hollywood levels of voice acting.
It's good to see you, buddy.
Clearing it!
But I can't really talk about the Alrabasta saga without bringing up the format that One Piece is written in. The various arcs in One Piece are grouped into sagas, and other than Weast Blue, there will be one major arc that we're working towards, and then a lot of small setup arcs contained within that. For example, Reverse Mountain to Alrabasta is the Alrabasta saga, and unfortunately what ends up happening for me personally is I completely erase the smaller arcs from memory since they act as build-up for the climax of the saga that comes later on, and to put it bluntly, most of the time, they just aren't as interesting as the arc that their sagas are named after. When people talk about Alrabasta, they don't say, yeah man, Reverse Mountain and Little Garden were amazing. And when people talk about Skypieeiaugh, when they aren't going back and forth about how underrated it is or that you should skip it, they don't think solely of Jaya. They think of Skypieeiaugh itself. Yeah, there are some cool moments in those setup arcs, such as Blackbeard first showing up in Jaya and just casually dropping the hardest manga panel of all time. Or Sanji shit talking Crocodile in Little Garden. And don't worry, we'll get into Blackbeard's ha 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 looking ass soon. But at the end of the day, for me personally, none of the smaller setup arcs on the Alrabasta saga like Whiskey Peak or Little Garden are strong enough to be standalone stories. The only reason I enjoy them is because I know something good is happening later on, and they're essentially riding the coattails of that. It's kind of like those memes that draw the US from the perspective of other countries, and I want to make it clear, my issue isn't with that format itself, it's the arcs within them, because I fucking love the Summit War saga. Every arc from ShAbOndY to Marineford is just fucking perfect. ShAbOndY especially is such an amazing arc for me, it's in my top 3, but unfortunately, right when Oda really mastered this format, he stopped using it post Timeskip in favor of very long arcs. Back to Alrabasta, more specifically Drum Island and Blackbeard's smelly ass, because I thought that his first appearance was in Jaya where he gave us this hard ass manga panel. But nah, his they/them looking ass was mentioned all the way back in Drum Island when it's mentioned that he came to their kingdom and destroyed it and that Ace was hunting him, and I never even put 2 and 2 together. Even in Jaya, I thought that he was just some random drunk guy, but no, Oda was out here foreshadowing the biggest conflict in the series so far, 400 something chapters before it happened. 400 whole chapters. That's longer than Vagabond, bro. I swear, going back to the series and seeing all this little hints of foreshadowing, like Sanji calling himself Mr. Prince in Alrabasta, or Doflamingo and Kuma showing up in Jaya almost 500 chapters before Dressrosa, makes me feel like Oda is just actually going back in time and editing the chapters, because I refuse to believe I missed such massive plot points my first time reading. But there's another thing in Drum Island I want to talk about, which is Wapol. I mean, just what the fuck, man. Out of all the arcs in Alrabasta, Drum Island is actually my favorite because it has great moments like Luffy climbing the mountain and Chopper's backstory, and here look dropping yet another banger of a One Piece moment. I mean, holy shit, dude, I forgot how many happened this early in the story. But all of that gets weighed down because of Wapol. Every time he's on screen, I just sit there and feel nothing but absolute apathy towards everything he does. He feels like a roadblock for the main characters, purely to be a roadblock, not because he has some sort of goal or deeper motivation to him as a character that makes him clash into main characters. He's evil purely to be evil, which can work if done correctly, but it's the fact that he's so aware of it and revels in how evil he is that makes him so aggravating. Wapol is a case in point example of an overall issue I have with One Piece, which is villains that are obnoxious and not in a funny way because they're genuinely awful people as well, and as a result, you just can't take them seriously. I understand that in a long-running series you can't have every villain be serious because it makes things feel very boring, and One Piece has an overall lighthearted tone, but Buggy and Spandam are much better examples of comic relief and a slimy villain than Wapol. Buggy is entertaining because he always falls upwards without intending to, and it's always amusing to see what stupid shit he gets into despite not at all being a threat. I also find it very entertaining how he couldn't get to Lafta because he was sick, and Spandam is just fucking annoying and exists purely so you can hate him. That's why something stupid happens to him, it's like, good, you fucking deserve it. But with Wapol, he's presented as this threat you're supposed to take seriously, but he also turns into a fucking house, so I feel nothing towards him because he's too evil to work as comic relief and too stupid to feel like a threat. For every Crocodile, Lucci, Doflamingo, and off-screen Blackbeard, we've got 10 Foxies and Pikas. Yeah, he's an asshole who privatizes healthcare, but he also ate a fucking ship. How am I supposed to feel about this character? And it's the same with Caesar and Punk Hazard. Oda tried to make Caesar into comic relief in Whole Cake Island and Zoe, and the whole time I'm just sitting there reading this thinking, this man experimented on and drugged children and showed absolutely zero sympathy for it, and saw a 1,000-year-old city get destroyed because of a bomb he made. And now you expect me to look at him and feel something other than complete and utter abhorrence. Like, no, fuck him. Let me get into Alrabasta itself. And this arc starts with Bon clearly mimicking everyone except Sanji. And let's talk about Sanji. More specifically, Pre-time skip Sanji. Sanji's role at this point in the story, besides being one of the main 3 fighters, was to always be off in the background doing some shit behind the scenes that would inevitably save the Straw Hats when you think all hope was lost. Whenever they ran into a massive roadblock, it was Sanji who would appear like Jesus Christ himself with a solution. When the crew didn't have an internal post at Alrabasta and Little Garden, Sanji found one. And later on in Alrabasta, he helped all the other crew members escape because he was the only one Bonds Clay didn't mimic. He was the sole member that Crocodile didn't know by face. In Skypieeiaugh, Sanji snuck onto Enel's ship to damage it and saved Nami and Usopp after Luffy had failed. Then later on in Water⁷, when he disappears for like 20 episodes, it turns out he was following Robin and was the first Straw Hat to get on the train to rescue her, Frankie, and Usopp, and then using a transponder snail to update the rest of the crew in the situation. And then in Enyieys Law B, after rescuing Robin and finally getting the boat to sail away with, the crew still can't escape because the gates of justice aren't open, so Sanji leaves mid-fight to open them so they can escape. Sanji was so useful, I loved him, but now he's just evolved to being a tier 3 sub to whatever woman he sees, and I legitimately cannot remember an actual serious conversation he's had with either Nami or Robin. Thankfully, we saw a bit of a return to old Sanji and Wano when he turned invisible to rescue Momonosuke and when he saved Zoro and Law from falling into the ocean, so I hope we see pre-time skip Sanji come back, especially now that he has the power to turn invisible. But man, I miss this Sanji so much. But anyway, back to Alrabasta. I love it as a setting. This whole arc is great because Alrabasta as an island is one of the only islands along with Water⁷ and Skypieeiaugh that actually felt big to me. I'm sure it's just a personal thing, but it felt like the size of an actual country. Maybe it's because of how many different places on the island they go to, like Anohana, the Sandora River, the desert, Emerald City, Yuba Oasis, Rain Base, Kateria, and the capital city. The whole island just felt big. I don't know how else to describe it. And in Alrabasta, Ace makes his first on-screen appearance and he tells Luffy about Blackbeard, and again, how did I miss this the first time around? Oda made it so glaringly obvious that Blackbeard was a threat, and here I was just sat there thinking, man, Ace is so hot. But the thing I really liked about Alrabasta was Luffy saving Smoker from drowning, because it ties into my favorite core theme of the story, which is that there is no clear-cut good and bad guys. Both sides are flawed, but not because the side they're on. No, it's just because they're awful people. If I can praise early East Blue for anything, it's that we saw this team of pirates and marines working together against a common enemy all the way back in the first arc. And all of a sudden, Smoker is forced to take a step back and question himself because this pirate, who's supposed to be the bad guy, not only just saved his life, but also had the same goal as him. And afterwards, instead of recognizing it, the government decides to cover it up and lie by saying that he defeated Crocodile, promote him for it, and he's like, wait, these people I'm working for aren't always the good guys. What the fuck? I thought pirates were evil. Which directly ties into one of my favorite moments in the series that happens later on in Dressrosa. But we'll talk about that when we get there. Relax. Jesus, we've still got like 30 arcs to cover. Dear God, why did I do this to myself? Speaking of Crocodile, I love him. He's still one of my absolute favorite villains in the series, second to only off-screen Blackbeard. He was the first time Luffy actually lost against a villain, and not even by a close amount either. He lost twice to Crocodile. He felt like an actual threat. He doesn't have a sad or tragic backstory, and I still love him simply because he's that charismatic. And I wish Oda was able to just write villains like this more often, relying more on how good their interactions are and how much of a threat they feel like, rather than, look, he was born at the age of 6 without a face. Don't you feel bad for him? It just sucks because other than him and Mr. 1 through 3, none of the other Baroque work members are interesting in the slightest. And I only include Mr. 3 because if not for him randomly reappearing in Impel Down and helping Ace escape, only for Ace to turn into a donut 3 seconds later, I would have completely forgotten about him. The only other member I remember is Miss Doublefinger, because she was Nami's first actual fight in the series that showed she can be just as strong as the main 3 fighters. It just isn't in a brute force way like them, but is instead more of a planning and calculated way. And speaking of fights, we can't brush past Zoro's fight with Mr. 1. I like how in this arc, even though Zoro was already fucking comically strong and could pick up a building, he still had realistic goals and felt like he was actively training and getting better. Like how after he can't cut the wax in Little Garden, or how he complains about not being able to cut the bars of the prison cell or steel, which if Zoro had just paid attention in 7th grade science class, he'd know that to cut steel, all you need is a material harder than it. But at this point in the story, Zoro's goals felt much more grounded, like when he can't fight range people in Skypieeiaugh and has to work around it. Now here he is slicing entire fucking islands. Alrabasta also had one of my favorite Zoro outfits too, so that just further goes to show how much he shines here. I also miss this point in the story where Robin felt like an actual threat in every scene she was in because of her devil fruit, and also her cowboy hat. the loss of it is the biggest tragedy in the series. But the next arc is Skypieeiaugh, and I think Skypieeiaugh is honestly hilarious because one side of the fan base is like, it sucks, it's too isolated, it's too long coming off of Alrabasta, none of the characters in it have reappeared since, you should skip it. And then the other half says it's the best arc in the series and because it foreshadows Gear 5 and how it's a great commentary on the colonization of indigenous tribes. Meanwhile, I'm just over here like, so are we gonna ignore the glaring amount of homoerotic tension between Nolan and Kalgara? Like, Nolan's last thoughts as he was dying weren't of his wife and kids, it was of Kalgara. I'm surprised they didn't just kiss like Mario and Sonic in that scene where they toasted each other. Also, Sue was very cute. I miss her. Then there's Long Ring Longland, which honestly just, here's my thoughts about Long Ring Longland. Moving on. Oh, my love, my sweet prince, my beautiful Water⁷ and Enyieys Law B, my second favorite arcs in the series and one of my favorite islands. Water⁷ looks like something straight out of a painting and has such a pleasant atmosphere to it. And yes, I know Water⁷ is literally just Venice, but it's still such a good backdrop for all that happens in this arc. Enyieys Law B overshadowed it in my mind because that's where all the big action happened, but holy shit, man, Water⁷ is such an amazing standalone arc. It's the first arc in this series where there is an internal conflict in the crew, and I mean serious internal conflict. At the same time they have to do with Robin leaving, Usopp then leaves the crew. They now also have to deal with being framed for trying to assassinate someone, and the Mary is broken. So now the crew is stuck on an island missing 2 crew members with no way to escape, with an entire island hunting them, and the Frankie family on top of that, with a big ass storm too. And somehow, despite there being a total of 6 whole major plot points in it, Water⁷ doesn't at all feel bloated because all those things tie into one another in some way, and it creates this absolutely perfect back-to-back pacing where the crew is really being pushed to their limits. Also, I forgot Frankie's actual name was fucking Cuddy Flam. Like, imagine sitting in the womb for 9 months only to hear that you're gonna be named fucking Cuddy Flam, bro. Like, I would've just been a stillborn at that point. Like, give me the coat hanger, I'll do it myself. Water⁷ was so crew focused, and I can't talk about this arc without mentioning the argument and fight between Luffy and Usopp. It is a great moment, especially when Sanji kicks Luffy for telling Usopp to leave, and then Nami attempts to mediate between the two of them. But I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about Usopp as a character. I really enjoy Usopp as a concept. It isn't that I hate him because he's weak, it's stupid to like or dislike a character based on how strong they are. I love having less powerful crewmates on board because it establishes balance. After all, it'd be so boring if everybody on the crew was strong, because it defeats one of the core themes of the show, which is working together to make up for our own individual faults as people, so we're greater than the sum of our parts. I mean, Luffy even said it himself in Arlong Park, and I love that small scene in Little Garden where Nami and Usopp are left with the ship and they look at each other and realize that they're the weakest ones of the crew. But compared to Usopp, Nami still has some amazing character moments and growth, and her being the navigator is so overlooked as a role. One Piece would not have gotten out of Weast Blue if not for Nami. And it isn't that I think Usopp is useless either. I can acknowledge that he was useful in Little Garden by burning the wax that Nami and Zoro were stuck in, and Enyieys Law B when he shot the keys to Robin's cuffs over, which is something that even the Marines commented was a ridiculous display of sniping, and none of their weapons could reach that far. So what is my problem with Usopp? It's the fact that he has character circles rather than arcs, and for every moment of growth he has, there's at least 5 steps in the opposite direction where he does or says something completely contradictory to that. Usopp's main gimmick as a character is being scared, running away, and then not being scared, and doing what he originally intended. And when this first happened in Arlong Park, where he explicitly said, "When I left my village, I should have given up the idea of peace or safety. If I'm not willing to risk my life and give it my all like they do, then I have no right to sail with them." And because he'd realized that he'd be a hypocrite since Nami helped save his village, and now here he was being scared when he has to save her, and then he just has to stand up to Chu. I was really excited because at this point in the story, I did not like Usopp. And then later on in Alrabasta, when he gets his fucking skull shattered and literally dies, he still stands back up because he refuses to let that mole bitch laugh at Luffy's dreams. I love those moments. But it comes to a point where it's like, alright Usopp, I get it. You were scared, and then you weren't, and I really enjoyed it the first time it happened, but how many times are we gonna go through the same song and dance until it just fucking sticks? And you can simply be useful without the gimmick of being scared beforehand. On ShAbOndY, Usopp carried Zoro to try and escape Kuma, and he refused to run and leave Sanji to fight, even after seeing what happened to Zoro. Then Usopp takes on fucking Kizaru with no hesitation. In Punk Hazard, he helped everyone escape by going to the surveillance room and telling them where to go using the intercom and cameras. In Wano, he got rid of Bao Huang, who, if you forgot, was the girl who was announcing the Straw Hats' plans to everyone and essentially snitching on them to the Beast Pirates. And he helped helped hand out the dango to the Beast Pirates to convert more of them to the Straw Hat side. Those last 4 moments I mentioned are all moments of Usopp working in the background and playing a massive support role, having something I refer to as Sanji moments. We need more Sanji moments for Usopp. Sanji is already one of the crew's top 3 fighters and the cook. He doesn't also always need to be the secretive badass off in the background, perfectly assessing what is needed in situations. I still want moments like that for his character, don't get me wrong, but that role is also so much more suited to Usopp's position as a sniper, someone who is always at a safe distance away and is able to assess and take out threats with insane accuracy. But Oda rarely ever uses Usopp's ability as a sniper in combat, since most of his fights tend to be up close melee fights. But when he does use Usopp's sniper abilities, it literally creates one of the biggest fucking memes in the community and is such an important moment in Dressrosa. And Usopp taking over as a Sanji moment character would also sign to the core theme of the story of bigger than the sum of our parts, as everyone else is a melee fighter and could distract enemies from spotting Usopp, and Usopp could take out threats to them that they would have noticed otherwise. We've more than established that Usopp is the weakest crew member. We've had those moments where he's scared but acts anyway, and we've literally had him come back from the time skip and say that he isn't a coward anymore, only for him to still regress back to the cycle of, oh no, I'm scared, I'm gonna run away, oh wait, no I'm not, die. And it's high time Oda just allows Usopp to be useful without attaching the whole coward thing to it, as Usopp pulling off impressive feats despite being the weakest crew member is already impressive in and of itself. Usopp using Haki once and then never again since was impressive because he's the underdog. The impact of those moments isn't at all diminished if we don't have a scene of Usopp running away scared before they occur. And I say all this in Water⁷ of all places because this whole arc is focused on how he feels so much weaker than the rest of the crew, and how he distances himself from them, but still sends his friend Sogeking in to help the Straw Hats because he isn't ready to face them himself, but he still wants to help. And at the end of this arc, he begs to come back to the crew and profusely apologizes. He wants to be here with them. He's accepted his position twice now. First in Arlong Park when he gives his monologue about risking his life, and here when he begs to be let back on the crew. He wants to be in the crew, even though he knows and has seen what that entails. So why is it that after having 2 scenes of Usopp saying that he's aware that he's been put in danger and wanting to be in danger, he's still a pussy? I don't get it. Also, I love how every discussion involving Usopp, there's always someone who comes in and says, he's gonna get his glow up in Elbaf, bro, just wait. Because in Little Garden, Usopp said he'd love to go to Elbaf. The chapter where Usopp said that is from December 20th, 1999. People have been saying, wait for Elbaf for over 20 years now. Wait for Elbaf is literally the One Piece equivalent of let him cook or he made graduation. Elbaf is one of the last islands in the New World before Laugh Tale, and by that point, you've already gone through essentially the entire New World without this prophesized power-up. You don't need it anymore. I'm not even particularly sure why Usopp admires the giants in the first place. I'm aware Elbaf is said to be the strongest country in the world, but every time giants have been shown, are always easily beaten. A 5-year-old girl throwing a temper tantrum burned down their village and gave their oldest giant fatal injuries, and in Enyieys Law B, the Frankie family took down Kashi, and Luffy one-shot Hydrogen in Dressrosa. I'm sure their strength is more in numbers, but goddamn, their individual strength has not been portrayed well so far. Usopp tangent aside, returning to Water⁷, Polly revealing to Lucci that the blueprints he gave them were fake was fucking stupid. Oda literally explicitly stated in big neon lights that Lucci was evil and I didn't notice. And also, this arc up until Thriller Bark is when to me personally the anime looked its best. The coloring and shading was perfect. Post time skip wasn't saturated enough. Like damn bro, they really gave Zorlo the Michael Jackson treatment. Wano looks good, but it can be a lot at times. Now moving on to Enyieys Law B. We're skipping the train part because absolutely nothing happened and not in the cool way. And also I'm gonna refer to Bueno as Bueno from now on because I'm Spanish and that is much easier to say. And I want to use Enyieys Law B to talk about another issue I have with One Piece villains. To give every Straw Hat something to do, all of the villains in One Piece are a leader and then followed by their subordinates. And what ends up happening is that the leader is the only interesting character and all their subordinates are completely forgettable. We see this with Don Creek and his pirates, Crocodile with Baroque Works, Enel and his priests, Lucci with CP9, Hody and the New Fisherman Pirates, Doflamingo and his family, Big Mom and her kids, Kaido and the Beast Pirates, with the Smilers, the Gifters, the Pleasures, the Waiters, the Toby Ropo. There's so many different categories for Kaido's Beast Pirates, and the only ones people remember are Queen and King because they fought Zoro and Sanji, and Ulti because she was cute. Without looking it up, can you tell me who Mr. 9 was, or who the hell any of these people are? Like, I've seen these 2 characters this so often, and I still have no idea what their names are. There are just so many side characters who are completely forgettable and don't exist outside of, let's give the rest of the crew someone to fight. So unfortunately, all of the members of CP9 other than Lucci's sexy ass are all boring. Also, it's funny because these organizations like CP9 and Baroque Works are very serious, yet they have absolute fucking schizos working for them. And it's funny to imagine Crocodile going, who should I hire from my highly secret crime syndicate to help me overthrow a country? Oh, I know, a guy named Babe who swings a 4-ton bat and says 4 like in golf, who has a pet bazooka with a cold that can turn into a dog which shoots exploding baseballs. I just really love to see that job interview, you know? But anyway, I can't talk about Enyieys Law B without bringing up Robin's I Wanna Live moment. We all knew it was coming. It's the main thing in this arc. Everything about this moment is absolutely perfect. The build up to it after learning her backstory, the music slowly swelling up, and I mean the voice acting, holy shit. That Ikita hit me in my fucking Watashi Kokoro desk, bro. Motherfucker, if this was not you during that scene, then you have no soul. I literally cried at this moment so hard that I split my fucking lip and it didn't heal for 4 days and I felt like a dumbass. Do you have any idea how difficult it is having to come up with a story on the spot? To avoid explaining to the grocery store cashier that the reason I have a scab on my lip isn't because I got punched, but because of an anime girl realizing her self-worth. But yeah, I love this moment because just like Arlong Park, it ties back into a deep childhood trauma that Robin has about Buster Calls. And the Straw Hats end up doing the impossible and helping Robin escape from something that she saw kill her entire family, erase her island from history, and force her to constantly live on the run, unable to trust anyone because she was wanted. Or I guess technically unwanted, depending on how you want to word it. And I mean, holy shit, what a backstory Robin has. It's definitely my personal favorite in the crew, although for some reason I can never remember the name of the island she grew up on. I tried looking it up but I couldn't find anything. Then immediately afterwards we get some amazing fights, and also Frankie versus Fukuro, which it was really stupid how Fukuro just flat out told them they all had different keys that might unlock Robin's cuffs, and gave the crew a chance to rescue her for literally zero reason. Like, I understand wanting to stall them, but why wouldn't you lie about that and give Lucci the real key? Also, as good as Kaku versus Zoro is, and Jabra versus Sanji, I forgot just how much padding there was before both of them actually get interesting. The gimmick of Jabra and Kaku constantly stopping to argue over who gets the kill went on for way too long, and so did the whole thing of Zoro and Usopp being cuffed together. It was less of a fight, more of a stalemate for far too long, because as soon as Jabra or Kaku were gonna attack, they say, no wait, I wanna do it, and then they get in a fight. And right when Zoro's about to attack, he remembers that Usopp is cuffed to him. But I do love the joke of Kaku attempting to justify a shit-ass giraffe devil fruit when he clearly hates it.
I don't want to hear it anymore. For the last time, giraffes are awesome. I love giraffes.
His power could have been literally anything, and he got the ability to turn into a fucking giraffe. And also, Sanji fighting Khalifa was such an obvious and annoying cop-out way to take him out of the action for a while. Especially after he had just been so useful in being the first person to see that Robin was missing and then chasing after her. Like, if you know that you can't fight women, why did you run off and challenge the singular woman in the whole group? The reason I know this for a fact is because there are 7 total CP9 members and 6 Straw Hats currently in the tower. I'm counting Frankie even though he wasn't part of the crew at this point because he was helping with the fighting. But Luffy got rid of Bueno, whose only notable trait is being the poor test on me for Gear 2nd, and Lucci was helping escort Robin. So now we have 5 enemies but 6 crew members. And what do? That's right, we have Sanji turn into a fucking pile of soapy, incapacitated glob of mush. And with Khalifa too, it's so obvious that Oda dumped her down so that Nami could win. This woman is capable of all 6 ridiculous martial arts and has a devil fruit. Well, what does she decide to do after beating Nami and having her lie helpless on the floor? That's right, she takes a fucking bath. But I do still enjoy this arc for all the power-ups the crew gets and Lucci's sexy ass forcing Luffy to go beyond his limits. Also, let's be honest, Chimney was the real hero of Enyieys Law B. Can we get a round of applause for my bestie Chimney? She not only revealed the secret passage that Spandam took, but she also saved Luffy when he was drowning. Without her, they not only would not have been able to catch Robin in time, but Luffy would have also actually fucking died. Chimney's ironically one of my favorite characters from this whole saga. She's just so fun, and I think it's hilarious how big of a role she played in it despite being so silly. And speaking of that secret passage, I loved how tense this arc felt. The first part in the tower really felt like a race against time where every second mattered. First, there's Luffy catching up to Robin, then the crew needing to fight and get the right key, and then the Buster Call gets enacted, and then now have 30 minutes to do all of that, and then as soon as Frankie saves Robin, the tunnel floods and all the crew gets trapped. But then as soon as we get to the escape ship with Robin and wait for Luffy to finish fighting Lucci, they destroy the escape ship, and now we need a new way out, except there's a bunch of marine battleships around us and we need to open the gates of justice. I mean, just fuck me, bro. I forgot just how stressful this arc was. I need a smoke break just talking about it. Also,
It should have been me!
But with all that amazing constant tension, we come to my least favorite part of this arc, which is the going merry sailing itself and saving everyone right when hope was lost. I was fine with the ship having a soul. That was fun because it made it go from like an inanimate object to a pet in my mind, where you talk to it and wonder if it understands you. But the merry sailing itself and literally just being telepathic was the most Walt Disney-ass moment in all of One Piece. I still bawled my eyes out though when it was burned. I mean, it's just not fair. You can't pull up with that and expect me not to cry. I swear to God, if they use this song or the first ending when the anime ends, I'm not even gonna cry. I think I would literally just pass away. Like, that's it, bruh. My soul is with my ancestors now. Not even a dramatic death either. In the span of a second, I'll go from how yeah we found the One Piece to just... Then there's a small bit of story after Enyieys Law B, which I just consider part of Enyieys Law B itself, since there's no reason to make it its own separate thing. And I love this small section of recovery chapters. After all the shit that happened in Water⁷ and Enyieys Law B, it's nice to be able to just have a smoke break and relax for a bit. We get to see everyone finally getting a bounty and the reaction of everyone in their hometown. And for the first time in hundreds of chapters, we see so many familiar faces I had completely forgot about. And also Kobe and Helmeppo are there, which just like... Man, they're lucky they were one of the first characters in the series because that is literally the only interesting thing about either of them. And even then, I am still barely interested in them. And Zoro's speech in this section about Usopp returning to the crew is honestly one of his most important character moments to me. I place it up there with Mihawk scarring him. Him saying we aren't little kids playing pirate hit me like a fucking truck. Like, goddamn Zoro, I didn't know you were also a poet along with a swordsman. Also...
It should have.
And then there's some world building in this arc where Luffy's Dark Souls item description of a grandpa shows up and essentially just lore dumps throughout the world and tells Luffy he has a dad, which leads to another issue I have with One Piece. Some things are revealed after so long into the story that I just simply do not care anymore, such as Luffy's dad being Dragon. It was cool to realize that Dragon was that person in Logtown, but at the same time, nobody probably even remembered that scene, and at that point, we were 314 episodes into the anime and 432 chapters into the manga. Nobody was reading, still desperately wanting to know who Luffy's dad is. You could literally read the entirety of Attack on Titan 3.2 times over in that amount of chapters. Another example of this is how after 957 chapters and episodes, because the anime's pacing is horrible, in a chapter released in 2019, 22 years after the story started in 1997, we finally see how much Roger's bounty was, which really feels like information that could have been revealed at the beginning of the story at no consequence. But the ultimate example of this being literally anything involving Shanks. When Shanks appeared in Marineford, I'm gonna be honest, I just did not care. Because do you want to know how many times Shanks has appeared in the story up until that point? Three times. He was shown in Logtown when Luffy first got a bounty, then the scene in Jaya where he sent Rockstar to deliver a letter to Whitebeard, and then the scene near the end of Enyieys Law B here where he meets Whitebeard. But let's be nice and count all of those moments, along with every moment with Shanks in the story, post-time skip, and when he's shown in flashbacks. And so if we take every appearance he has made in the story and in flashbacks, Shanks has made a whopping total of 13 appearances across the entirety of One Piece at the time of me making this. There's all those moments I just mentioned, his flashback with Luffy at the beginning, the flashback with Rayleigh and ShAbOndY, the flashback meeting with Ace, the scene after Marineford where he goes to Whitebeard's grave, then him reacting to Luffy's bounty after Dressrosa, Reverie when he went to the Gorosei, Wano in the Odin flashback when he used Haki to scare off Ryokuju, who was a fucking bitch by the way, dropping off Marco at Sphinx Island, and then Elbaf when he beat the shit out of UAS. Someone actually compiled all the scenes in the anime with Shanks in a video made 5 months ago, and do you want to know how much total screen time Shanks has had? Less than an hour. The One Piece anime has been going on for 24 years and has over 1,000 episodes, and the character who is solely responsible for setting in motion the entire story has less than 3 episodes worth of total screen time. How the fuck do you expect me to care about a character shown that infrequently? Shanks is like Sakamoto from Gintama, who, for those of you who haven't seen Gintama, go watch it, but Sakamoto is a character who shows up in more of the endings and openings than he does in the actual anime. I am all for drip feeding info about characters and things to add an air of mystique and legend around them. After all, that's why the world building in One Piece is so good. Things are slowly revealed over the story, but there's a limit on how well that works. And if after 24 years such an important figure has less than an hour worth of screen time, I just cannot care anymore. Like, I'm not fucking 12, Shanks. Being strong doesn't make you a good character. And that sucks because I want to like Shanks. He seemed so interesting and mysterious at the beginning of the story, but now I just feel nothing when he shows up. It doesn't matter if you come back with the milk anymore, Shanks. You're still not my dad. But that same reason of drip feeding info is ironically why I love the flashback on whatever island Robin grew up on. It builds up such a crazy idea of the Void Century. Honestly, Oda did it a bit too well here because the entire draw of the Void Century is that we don't know anything about it, and nothing can fill the amount of mystery and terror behind it. There's no answer for what happened in the Void Century that could satisfy me at all, because any answer that's given as to why it's taboo fruit is going to be something that I understand. And the entire reason why I find it so fascinating is because I don't understand it. I don't understand what could possibly pose such a massive threat to the government and world at large, that the world government is willing to murder innocent people of all ages, 1,000 Marines, and burn down an entire country and erase it from history just for simply knowing the existence of an ancient kingdom from the Void Century. Nothing's essential about the kingdom either, like its culture or what it was called. Just knowing that it existed is enough for the government to hunt you down and kill you. The Void Century is one of those things where the whole appeal is theorizing what it could be but not actually knowing what happened. And to prove my point, in Egghead, when it was revealed that in the Void Century there was advanced technology, I was disappointed because that is something I understand. I've seen that trope of advanced ancient technology before in plenty of media. I've seen it in Zelda with the Zonai, I've seen it in the Elder Scrolls with the Dwemer, and I've seen it in fucking Jak and Daxter with the Precursors. Now there's Further Bark, which is interesting because it's the only standalone story arc in the series that doesn't have a connection to anything happening before or after it, and also because it is one of my least favorite arcs. But weirdly enough, I only dislike the middle of it. I love the beginning where Luffy is meeting Brook and with his singular brain cell immediately asks him to join the crew, and then Brook immediately agrees as well. I love the dynamic between Nami and Usopp throughout this arc. They just play so well off of each other, although I find it annoying that Chopper is included in their whole weakling trio thing, because Chopper can fight and he's proven to be decently strong, but instead is reduced to running away for comic relief until Oda puts them in a situation where they need to fight and Chopper is suddenly all like, oh yeah, I can fight, and then does something. And the setting of Further Bark is great, you know, I'm quirky, I'm not like other girls, I love horror, and we've got zombies, bats, weird hybrid creatures, ghosts, and people without shadows. The whole theme and aesthetic of Further Bark directly speaks to my inner pick-me girl, but it's still Further Bark. Other than some funny scenes like Luffy pushing the zombie back into the ground, this whole arc is bogged down by being way too long for how little goes on for 90% of it. Absalom, Moria, and Hogback are all up there, some of my least favorite villains in the entirety of One Piece. Their designs are all awful, they're terrible people, and they fall into that category I mentioned before where they're just annoying rather than intimidating or funny. Especially Absalom, I mean, Jesus Christ, aside from him just being an awful person, the scenes with him being a perv are written in such a tonally deaf way, and it bugs me so much. Like, yeah, let's just sexually assault Nami and dress up as slapstick, because when I think of sexual assault, the first thing that comes to mind is, yeah man, that shit's hilarious. I mean, just look at what Nami was wearing, that bitch was asking for it. And then Sanji as well, the scene where he says that Absalom stole his devil fruit from him because his dreams to spy on naked women is also written as a comedic moment, when neither of these things are jokes, they're just fucking creepy, and they're not necessary because this arc has shown that it can actually be funny without having to rely on overdone anime tropes. And I say that those scenes are tonally deaf because Chopper yells at Hogback for digging up Sindri's corpse and forcing someone else's soul into it because she rejected him in life, and how it's morally wrong since he isn't in love with her as a person and just for her body, and is forcing not only his will onto her corpse, but also someone else to do his bidding. And it's written as a serious moment, but just before then and after we see Absalom doing the exact same thing, except it's presented in a funny way. The whole thing with Lola chasing him is so annoying too. The fact that One Piece women are only ever extremely sexy or Jabba the Hutt is a whole topic in and of itself, but then to make a punchline out of that is so distasteful. You see, Lola wanting Absalom is funny because a woman chasing a man is normally hot, but Lola is ugly, so it's comedic because ugly women wanting partners is funny because they think they're people and deserve love and affection with their big dumb fuck lips. Lola being rejected 4,444 times isn't sad, it's funny because she's a dumb fucking ugly slag who nobody wants. And speaking of that scene with Sindri, I don't see people mention this enough, but it has one of my absolute least favorite tropes in it, which is a character who's possessed or under the will of some other character, and then all of a sudden coming to their senses because someone told them to, quote, snap out of it one too many times, despite the character in question being a brain-dead, emotionless husk with no will of their own for years beforehand. It's cliche, it's overdone, and there's no emotional impact to it. Maybe if we just try really, really hard and put on the glass slipper and find true love's first kiss, then they'll snap out of it. I saw this exact moment coming a mile away once we learned that zombies are filled with other people's souls and not their own. And I talked about Hogback and Absalom, but I haven't gone in depth into Moria yet. Before anyone comes for me, I am fully aware that Moria is supposed to be like a defeated version of Luffy because he tried to beat Kaido in the New World and then lost, but even going back through this arc with that knowledge, I still find him incredibly boring as a villain. I don't care about anything in this arc other than Brook's backstory, nothing happening, and Perona. If you just gave Moria's devil fruit and backstory to a character who wasn't so goofy looking and just made him a serious character, then I could like him, but that isn't the case, and he's still the pencil dick biasol that is Gecko Moria. This is probably an odd comparison, but if he was just like Aizawa from My Hero Academia where he was completely monotone and apathetic, I would have loved him. The whole fight between Gecko Moria and Nightmare Luffy was dragged out too, and Nightmare Luffy is a BS power-up if I've ever seen one. And hey, you remember that really awesome scene in Thriller Bark where the whole crew worked together to fight a common enemy, and they actually Luffy felt like a crew instead of a bunch of individual characters. Let's drag that out for way too long and also never do that again and just have Luffy always fight the strongest person on the island and split everyone up in every arc. I want you to know, I watched Thriller Bark while eating a tripeta and I still think it's a dog shit arc. Do you know how bad something has to be for me where even with the stat buff I've experienced it while I'm eating one of my favorite foods, I still don't enjoy it? I can watch something that is a solid 4 out of 10, but if I'm eating something I love, that brings up to at least a 7. Yeah, that didn't happen with Thriller Bark. The only reason people, myself included, like Thriller Bark is because somebody completely unrelated to anything happening on Thriller Bark, who's a way more interesting character than any of the ones introduced on the island, shows up and gives us Zoro's best character moment. God, Kuma is such an awesome character, and I'm so glad that he stayed relevant until now. With the reveal of what happened to him and how he's Bonnie's dad, I love everything about him. The fucking sound his devil fruit makes is one of my favorite sounds in all anime. But everyone knows about the moment where nothing happened. We all know why it's important. We all wish we could squeeze Zoro's man titties. However, I want to use this moment to discuss his relationship with Sanji. The dynamic between Zoro and Sanji is my favorite among any crew members, and the whole nothing happened moment is the first time we see that they clearly care about each other. Not that they don't care about each other, it's just that they don't express it in a traditional way very often, but the rare times like this when it does happen is very endearing and sweet. Anyone who actually thinks Zoro and Sanji hate each other has never had a real best friend. I'm sorry to find out this way, but it's the truth. Want to know who went around making sure that nobody knew what happened to Zoro? That's right, Sanji. Who was right there next to Zoro when Otoko was about to get shot? Sanji. And that moment in particular is one of my favorite moments of theirs in the entire series. The reason they fight so often is because they respect each other and because of how similar their personalities are. Sanji is the kind of person who expresses affection by jokingly insulting someone, and you don't need further proof than the scene in Little Garden where Zoro and Sanji get into a competition at the beginning of the arc to see who can bring like the bigger piece of meat, which is exactly what happened with Dory and Broggy, where they ended up fighting for over 100 years, not because of the competition or because they hate each other, but because they respect each other, and is a direct mirror of Zoro and Sanji. And to further prove this, Dory and Broggy literally overhear Zoro and Sanji fighting and say, "Oh, a hunting competition, that sounds familiar." It could not be any more obviously spelled out that Zoro and Sanji deeply respect one another, and somehow people don't see that. And to further cement Thriller Bark's ending being better than the whole arc itself, Lolo giving Nami a Viver card directly plays into Whole Cake Island, and also explains what a random piece of paper that Ace gave Luffy hundreds and hundreds of chapters ago is. And honestly, given how tiny Luffy's brain is, I'm surprised he remembered, because I'll be honest, I didn't. Like, I love this scene between Zoro and Brook where they mourn fallen allies. We need more moments between Zoro and Brook, and we still have no idea what those shadows at the end were. We also get Brook's backstory at the end of this arc, and man, Brook is so close to being my favorite crew member after Robin. I love his design, I love his personality, and he has one of the 3 laughs in the series that I unironically enjoy. Caesars and Blackbeards are more like ASMR to me, but I love Brook all throughout this arc, especially the scene where his goofy ass is running across the water. But I want to use Brook to bring up a problem I have with how One Piece handles its main characters. Essentially, we get one amazingly done trauma dump arc revolving around them, and then after that, they never mention anything from that arc again, despite that being the sole motivation for them as a character, and they end up as nothing more than running gags or caricatures of themselves, and we learn nothing else about their past.
It all began on the day of my actual birth. Both of my parents failed to show up.
Damn, bro, I didn't know Doofenshmirtz was a Straw Hat. And Brook is the biggest example of this. Again, I can't say this enough. I love his personality. I love his backstory. I love his design. But to see him get delegated is nothing more than asking women to see their panties or scaring people because he's a skeleton feels like a huge disservice to him as a character and his backstory. I'm fine with the jokes he makes about being dead because, I mean, bro has been alone at sea for 50 years with the corpses of his dead friends. It's no wonder that he's gonna be a little loony. But I want to see more of that melancholic side of Brook. I don't care if Thriller Bark gave us the best outfits for Nami and Robin and our Lord and Savior Perona. In my eyes, it is still one of the weakest arcs in the series, and the fact that it's in between Enyieys Law B and the upcoming ShAbOndY arc doesn't help it either. I'm not going to talk too much about the very beginning of ShAbOndY with them finding Kami and Hachan, although Duval's reveal is probably the funniest joke in the entire series to me. At this point in the series, I was getting kind of impatient because they're supposed to go to Fishman Island after Enyieys Law B, but then Thriller Bark just pops up out of nowhere, and once we get past that, now we can go to Fishman Island, and then some random person from Sanji's past shows up and was introduced. It felt like one arbitrary roadblock after the other, but the fucking reveal of Duval immediately made me lose any frustration I had. I was right there with Brook LMFAOing my ass off at this. Also, it's funny that in this minor section of all fucking places is the first example of Luffy using Conqueror's Haki. But god, going back to this part of the story, I forgot just how much I hate Papagu. Half of his lines are just him yelling Kami, yet doing absolutely nothing to help besides crying. Every time I see him in a stupid Jamaican Rasta hat, I want to put him on a grill and eat him. So let's get into ShAbOndY itself. My favorite parts of One Piece are the really fucked up parts, like slavery, the oppression of the world government, the fish racism, and the death of Robin's cowboy hat. And so it should come as no surprise that ShAbOndY is my top 3 favorite arcs. I mean, right from the beginning, the amount of tension that's established in this arc is amazing. We're warned that we can't oppose the world nobles no matter what they do, even if we see someone die. So automatically, after we see the fun bubble island, we get told, yeah, we're in the hood now, don't make eye contact. And then on top of that, you add in the marine presence being on the island, and we get told not to make trouble because if we do, shit is gonna go down. We also get introduced to the 11 supernovas, who were created within 2 days, and you can tell because only 3 of them are actually interesting. By the way, Bonnie was cast aside way too quickly. I say that partly because I like her design, but also because she essentially has a one-shot devil fruit. Thankfully she came back now on Egghead, but I don't see people talking about how OP she is nearly enough. Like, yeah, everybody's strong until your dick doesn't work anymore. I also love the scene between her and Zoro where she has to fucking tackle him to the ground and cover up for him. Like, damn bro, Zoro was not messing around here. Motherfucker was gonna turn Charles into a past tense. And can we talk about how amazingly Rayleigh is introduced in this arc? You already know that when an anime has an old man who says that he isn't important, you're about to see one of the most OP characters in the entire show. It's over at that point. Everything that happens at the auction house is just incredible. You got the famous scene where Luffy punches someone so hard he turns the anime back into a manga. And again, the foreshadowing. There's a scene at the slavery auction where the guy in charge calls Doflamingo, who says in the call, slavery is dead, this is the age of smiles. Like, Oda literally spelled out the entire post-timeskip plot in the sky and personally came to my house to tell me, and I somehow didn't notice on my first read. And living up to his status as the OP old guy, Rayleigh gives us another banger of a scene in the bar where Robin asks Rayleigh if they learn the history of the world, and he says yes, but he can't tell her because, and I quote, write this shit down, there's nothing she can do about it right now. Like, what does that even mean? I love the way the voice entry is built up. I never want to learn anything about it. Shortly after that bar scene, we get introduced to Kizaru, who is my friend's favorite admiral, but just between you and me, we both know Wujitora and Aokiji are the best. But I still love his presence on ShAbOndY because it really helps us to play into the underlying theme of this whole saga, which is the crew finally being way out of the league when it comes to strength, and far beyond where pure luck can carry them. And that inevitably reaches its peak when we see them struggle to fight Birdnose, Fat Aokiji, and Fat Luffy. Normal Luffy sees this, and for the first time, he doesn't go in guns blazing and tell them all to fight. He just yells at everyone to just focus on escaping. But this is ShAbOndY. We can't have nice things. So we get to see all these lovely crew members who we've grown so attached to, and Usopp, slowly disappear one by one as they're completely helpless to stop it. Which is such a fucking asshole scene, but is so powerful because even though I know they don't die, I still felt like a part of me was just ripped into my chest. And not to be your 10th grade English 2 teacher, Miss Dingleberry, but the scene of the bubble popping directly representing that Luffy had been living in a bubble up until that point, fucking amazing. I hate this moment. I adore this whole saga so much. I have not cried more back to back during an anime than I did during these arcs. And if I hear any of the fucking openings used during this part of the story, not counting the 11th one because that one sucks, there is a non-zero chance I will end up looking like this. The drastic shift in both tone and storytelling makes this part of the story feel so unique because it's the first time since essentially Romance Dawn that we see a completely solo Luffy, and even then during Romance Dawn, Luffy wasn't alone for that long before he met Kobe, so we finally get to see what he as a character is like by himself. And it made me really curious to imagine what One Piece would have been like had the series followed this formula of Luffy traveling alone to different islands and assembling a small army, rather than Luffy and his friends being on an adventure. After coming off the amazing arc that is ShAbOndY, we get to Amazon Lily, which is also an amazing arc. I love how Hancock's story expands upon the corruption of the world government, especially since it doesn't take a genius to infer what some of the things she's implying are when she's retelling her story. And also, I'm not sure how I never thought of if Luffy's penis would also be stretchy until this arc. And I have a pretty immature mind, but somehow after 400 plus episodes in, I never even jokingly wondered if his penis would also be stretchy. But then when it was shown in Amazon Lily, I was like, oh yeah, it would be stretchy, innit? It also shows where all the other crew members went when they got launched, and we see Nami learn about wind knots and Sanji learning about hormone cooking recipes, which to this day they have both used a total of once during Timeskip. But the arc I want to talk about in depth is Impel Down, because this arc gives us that historical buggy moment I mentioned earlier, and also a much more morally great side to Luffy. Everything he's done up until this point has been morally good. In the world of One Piece, he's seen as a criminal because he's gone against the world government, but everything he's done so far was essentially just intervening where the government either refused to or couldn't, like when he stopped Arlong or Crocodile. But Impel Down is the first arc where we see a side of Luffy that isn't good. He goes and frees all these dangerous criminals without ever stopping to think think about the consequences of doing so. And out of all of those, there's only a small handful of criminals that were actually good. The rest of them were probably in the world's most secure and deadly prison for a good fucking reason. Apply a real world lens to the situation. Does someone breaking into a maximum security federal prison and destroying it while freeing 241 dangerous criminals sound like something that a good person would do? No, it does not. And I just wish that we saw more of this morally gray side to Luffy, because I love that Luffy is a criminal, but that's contrasted by him being presented as the main character, so we get a bit of a biased perspective on that. Because this aspect of his character, who simply just does whatever he feels like because he wants to be free, regardless of if it's illegal or not, like dining and dashing or stealing, is far more interesting to me than seeing him yell about meat really loudly, or turning around and do something he was just told not to do. And I wish we explored its morally gray side more. I don't love or hate Luffy. I acknowledge that for what One Piece is, he's a perfect main character, but for me personally, there's only really a few moments of his where I enjoy him. The rest of the time, I am completely neutral to him as a character. The only even somewhat negative thing I can say about Impel Down is that other than Magellan, who by the way had no right being as OP as he was, and for obvious reasons sake, none of the other creatures or people Luffy runs into feel particularly noteworthy. Like, I doubt anybody watching remembers who the fuck these two people were. Other than that, I mean, it's a Summit War saga. You already know Impel Down is a good arc. That sense of tension and desperation I mentioned in ShAbOndY with Luffy being pushed beyond his limit and being completely out of his league is on full display here. And when they finally got back to the entrance only to realize that all of the boats are missing and now they have to wait for Jinmbe while holding off Magellan, I legitimately had to take a break from watching and go play with a puppy for a bit just to de-stress. And I'm really curious if that line where Imporo tells Luffy that he'll take 10 years off of his life will actually come into play later on, because we also saw Lucci saying that using Gear 2 and 3 shortened Luffy's life. And I mean, I can't talk about Impel Down without bringing up Crocodile coming back. My underwear was absolutely sopping wet when I first heard that. Mugiwara. But to conclude Impel Down, I love the part where everyone gets on whale sharks, which is one of my personal favorite animals along with these ones, and made me very, very happy, which was the last time I was genuinely happy reading One Piece for the next 48 chapters, because now we get into Marineford. Remember Otis saying that Marineford in the whole Summit War saga was a side story and that he was surprised at how popular it was? Like, shut the fuck up, alright? Stop humble bragging. You wrote the biggest conflict to date, revealed that Ace was Roger's son, then killed Ace, brought out 5 of the 7 warlords and all 3 admirals, fucking reintroduced Shanks, and brought back my man Django as a side story? A side story to what exactly? The larger than life, endlessly captivating character that is Hammond? But I want to use Marineford to talk about Akainu, because he's definitely one of my favorite Marines. He is evil to an extent that it goes beyond me disliking him. It ends up circling back around to just being comically funny, and I always end up laughing because I am always in such disbelief that it's the only reaction I can have. Akainu is the kind of character where every time he shows up, you know he's about to say or do the most out-of-pocket shit ever, and you just sit there and wonder, how the fuck do you do the things you do, and the people around you just somehow not realize that you're actually fucking insane? My man Akainu not only killed Marines just because they ran away, but he was ready and more than willing to atomize Kobe just because he wanted to stop the conflict because they already achieved their goal. Akainu is also the amazing character who turned Ace into a donut, and I hate the way my brain works because whenever I see a death panel or frame out of context, I find them so fucking funny. Like, look at this panel and tell me that this is not peak comedy. So let's get into Ace's oddly funny death, because oh boy do I have a lot to say. Ace is a cool character, and his whole point was to be the confident OP older brother to Luffy. And Ace is extra cool because he's based off of Stevie Ray Vaughan, and much like Stevie Ray Vaughan, Ace fucking died. Ace goes through an entire anime's worth of character development on the execution scene where he goes from nobody wanting to help him because he got himself into the situation and it doesn't feel like he's worth saving, to then being fine whether he lives or dies, and then realizing people do care about him after realizing the length that they're willing to go through to save him, and wanting to live and be with them again. But after both of those things and that amazing character moment for him, he still turns his stupid ass around to fight Akainu just because he said one too many yo mama jokes, which is so fucking stupid. And I hate that in the world the characters are like, oh, you know, he's just like Roger, he could never back down from a fight, and they attempt to justify it. It's like, no, he was an idiot. This is not a good thing. He fucking died for no reason. Stop idolizing it and being like, oh, he's just like Roger. Your brother literally broke into the world's most dangerous prison, an entire fleet of ships came to challenge 100,000 Marines for you, and your adopted family died only for you to decide to throw all that away just because of pride. I mean, Akainu literally called Whitebeard a loser. That is the most elementary school ass insult known to man. Remember how Ace mentioned that he wanted to live? Remember how as kids, Ace promised Luffy that he wouldn't die so he could protect Luffy after seeing how depressed Luffy was when he couldn't save Sabo? And remember how Whitebeard issued an order to all of his crew to retreat back to New World with him? Yeah, it felt really satisfying when Ace went back on that promise and those orders of his captain because some dumbass with a name that sounds like a car model called his biological stepdad a poopy face.
Man, fuck you, you bitch.
Your mama.
Yo mama, yo bald-headed ass.
You mad.
As you can see here, Your Honor, my client Ace was simply just in a silly goofy mood. The only positive I have to say in this whole thing is that I love the dynamic between Garp, Ace, and Luffy during this arc, because one of my favorite scenes in pretty much all of One Piece is a scene in this arc where Garp is forced onto the ground by Sengoku and he says, "If you don't stop Kainu, then I will." Which, by the way, just to quickly kill the mood, Sengoku is a fucking waste of a character. Assuming you have a modicum of common sense, you'd assume that the head of the organization hunting our main characters would be a more present and threatening character in our story. But Sengoku does absolutely nothing, and all we ever see him do is a single move in Marineford, and every other scene with him is just him reacting to what the Straw Hats are doing with his pet goat, who I do like. His goat seems very respectful and intelligent. But anyway, I love seeing Garp as he's tormenting trying to be the good guy and the promises he made to Dragon and Roger to protect our children. I would watch an entire anime with this concept of two criminal brothers and their dad who's a cop. Garp is such an amazing and interesting character simply for the fact that he's one of the few Marines who actually seems to have a heart. And to end the battle in Marineford, I love this scene.
久しぶりだな。久しぶりだな。
Much like with post-Enyieys Law B, I just consider the post-war arc as part of Marineford itself, and I'm actually going to skip over the entire flashback portion of this arc because I'll bring up Sabo later. The only thing I want to mention about the flashbacks is that I forgot Gintama made fun of this arc, and seeing the sake scene in the wild gave me whiplash. One scene in particular I want to touch on is the scene of Luffy at Marineford, where he's essentially just a broken PTSD-ridden husk because I am an awful, terrible, despicable human being, and I like seeing people who are normally happy be absolutely fucking miserable, but also because it leads to one of my favorite character moments of his where Jinmbe pimp slaps Luffy and Luffy remembers that even if he lost Ace, he still has a crew who I legitimately missed at this point and I wanted to see again so badly. I was fucking bawling, bro. Again, when I said earlier that I spent this entire saga crying back to back, I wasn't kidding. How could I not with moments like this? And the scene of Luffy putting his hat on the rock and then showing a montage of everyone with We Are playing, tears, literal waterfalls came pouring out of my eyes. That shit got me out here looking like this. Although, not gonna lie, even if I was over here bawling my eyes out every time the crew was mentioned, and I definitely want to see them again, I did nearly drop One Piece when the time skip hit since the whole Summit War saga had such a unique and bittersweet tone compared to the rest of the story. And then when they all reunited again on ShAbOndY, I thought, oh, we're just gonna go back to them all being together over the course of a single episode as if nothing happened and resume the previous format of going to an island and solving the problems and Luffy always finding the strongest person on the island. And it took me more time than I cared to admit to pick up reading the series again, and oh man, I had no idea what I was in for at the time. You see, I don't dislike time skip purely because it's a time skip. I dislike it because everything resumed from the left off way too quickly. If you've been paying even a modicum of attention, I'm gonna include Return to ShAbOndY as part of Fishman Island because it really isn't important or significant enough to stand on its own. Although I do love this scene where Perona drops Zoro off and then Zoro tries to be cool and say, "Oh, what are you still doing here?" And then Perona starts yelling at Zoro like she's his older sister who just dropped him off for a sleepover at his friend's house. I found that very, very funny. But the whole fake Straw Hats thing in this arc was initially kind of funny, but it went on for way too long. And again, like I've mentioned before, the fact that they were actually just evil people removed any comedy from it. They fall into that realm of not being a threat, but also not being funny, so whenever they're on screen, you're just bored. If the time delegated to the fake Straw Hats thing was instead just used to show this crew sitting down and speaking to each other, the whole time skip would be so much better. If that was how this part was originally written, nobody would bat an eye. Nobody would be out here saying, man, I would love it if we actually didn't have this vital character moment and instead spent more screen time on the fake Straw Hats. They're way more interesting. But who needs that, right? Let's just have our main characters reunite and perfectly pick up where they left off without bothering to have any of them explain to each other what they've been doing or where or how they've been for the last 2 years after they got separated in a very dramatic and very sad way. Who needs that, right? Actually, no, wait, I'm sorry. How could I forget that panel where Luffy and Zoro have an off-screen conversation about where they've been so that Nami can explain fucking saline densities? Let me paint a picture for you. The year is 2010. You are a weekly One Piece reader. After 2 real-world years of not seeing the crew together, only for Oda to focus more on explaining saline densities. It's like, no, Oda, stop it. Your main character is having a conversation about what they've been doing after not seeing each other for 2 years in universe, and the real world as well is not a side conversation. The plot at this point is not so urgent and we can't spend any time on this. After all, there was apparently plenty of screen time for the fake Straw Hat. We've just been given essentially a reset button on the story. Everyone in the crew is stronger and every issue we had before is now solved. And it isn't just big things like that too. A lot of the time it feels like the crew just gleans over basic information about each other, such as the fact that 13 years after the time skip, nobody has once asked Zoro what happened to his eye. And that in particular bothers me so much because both of Zoro's scars mean something very significant. His chest scar is from Mihawk when he scarred him when he pledged to be his best and never lose again, which was a lie, but still. The scars on his ankles are from when in Little Garden he wasn't trying enough to cut the wax, and now he just has this other scar that we've not even bothered explaining or addressing once in the story. If you really want to get into Zoro, what about the fact that none of the crew know about Kuina? Zoro's told them that he's made a promise to someone, but he's never told them who, which makes no sense to me. The crew knows that Shanks inspired Luffy, they know that Zeph inspired Sanji, they know that Hero Lork inspired Chopper, but Zoro, nah, who cares, right? I am willing to lay down my life for you as a captain, but my childhood friend, nah, you're gonna be a tier 2 friend for that, sorry. Then there's the fact that after 1060 fucking chapters, Luffy finally tells the crew what his dream is when he becomes Pirate King. And it's supposed to be this dramatic moment where they're all like, wow, Luffy, that's amazing. But all I can think during this scene is why the fuck was this not the very first thing you told them? And believe it or not, there are people who will justify this complete lack of basic communication between friends as it just happens off screen and we don't see it, as if that makes it better in any way. So our main character is connecting and sharing things about themselves and spending time together in our story about friendship and found family just isn't important enough to be an on-screen moment, huh? Is that not in and of itself a glaring flaw rather than a justified reason? And once you take that into account and add on top of it the fact that the crew has spent more time apart than they did together the entirety of pre-time skip, it makes things even worse. Poor Brook, man. He was alone at sea for 50 whole years, and then as soon as he found friends who cared about him, they left him for 2 years, like 3 days afterwards. Like, I would have just thrown myself into the sea at that point. And also, I mentioned this before, but I really wanted to say it again. I hate the fact that Usopp comes back from the time skip and specifically says, I'm not a coward anymore. Except immediately after that, in Fishman Island, when him and Zoro get captured, he starts screaming his fucking head off and says, Zoro, do something. It's like, no, Usopp, why don't you do something? What was the point of you getting muscles if you're never going to use them? And let me just make it clear, this next point isn't an actual criticism. It doesn't ruin anything for me, and it's more of just something I find funny, because when I first realized how short pre-time skip was, I was coincidentally at the scene in Thriller Bark. You know, nothing happened, right? And again, taking into account how short pre-time skip is, all I could think of when reading Nothing Happened was this one RDC World 1 skit.
You must live out my dreams through you.
I literally just met you like 5 minutes ago. I don't know no dreams of yours. I don't know you, nigga.
Not a serious complaint. I just find it really funny how things lined up like that. But back to what I was saying. Some of my favorite moments in One Piece are the parties that are thrown after or during certain arcs. Or the like 2 minutes of sailing between islands where it's just the crew talking to each other in a world building. I love that anime only scene where the crew is inside when it's raining and Luffy gets interested in Robin's book. That is probably the most One Piece scene out there. Or the very beginning of Skypieeiaugh where they all go to Constance' house and just chill together. And the bonfire they have later in that arc. I want more moments like that. Give me just like 5 episodes or 5 chapters of the crew sailing and doing things on the ship with absolutely zero world building or tension, and I'll be happy. You could have Luffy be bored and going around to each crew member on the ship and seeing what they do and realizing how useful they are. Or you could have a scene where Zoro teaches Brook sword fighting, or Frankie and Usopp building shit. Anything like that I would just love, because goddamn, say what you want about the pacing of One Piece and the length, but no matter how slow you think it feels, the story really just never stops. But anyway, 5 chapter arc aside, now we're at Fishman Island, which is largely regarded as one of the worst arcs in the series. Well, actually, we're in the bit of sea before Fishman Island because I cannot gloss over this scene.
でも私
I know I said this a lot, But this is actually my favorite joke in the entire series. While I don't think this arc is as bad as people say, it still definitely has flaws, don't get me wrong, and I figured I'll just quickly address those before I get into what I enjoy about this arc. The most common complaints against Treasure Island are that all the villains are bad and there's no stakes in the arc, since the arc just serves as a way to show off the Straw Hat's new power. The fact that we waited so long, since we were supposed to go to Treasure Island since the end of Enyieys Law B, but then got caught up with Thriller Bark and ShAbOndY, and then the Summit War Saga, and the final main complaint in this arc is Sanji. All of which, yeah, I agree with. I fully understand why the Sanji joke was done. It's because Oda wanted to show that fishermen don't give blood to humans, so the moment later on where Jinmbe gives his blood to Luffy hits even harder. And to add extra emotional weight to fishermen not giving blood to humans, we need to have a crew member lose blood, but in a way that doesn't involve them getting the shit beat out of them, because that would negate the whole point of the time skip. And instead of doing this in a clever way, let's just have Sanji get a nosebleed every 3 seconds, treat it as a gag, and so that way we can continue the joke of Sanji being like, oh look, a woman, while introducing a vital plot point to this arc. That definitely won't make a jarring contrast when we go from a recurring gag to a life-threatening plot point. And as for the villains, yeah, no, 100%, they're all boring as shit in Fisherman Island. Vanderdecken served absolutely zero purpose, and I hate the fact that he was built up to actually be interesting since the ship was called the Flying Dutchman, because Oda is very selective and saves the things we commonly associate with pirates for special characters, such as how Lucci has a bird in his shoulder and Crocodile has a hook hand. Vanderdecken had a whole backstory, but no, he's literally just a pedophile. As for Hody, I mean, yeah, his pirate crew was boring and forgettable, but that isn't really different from every main villain group in this series. Just look at Baroque Works and Enel's Priests. Hody himself was an idiot, but that was kind of the point, and I feel like he served his purpose for what this arc was going for. He acted more as a vessel to show what blind hatred does to someone rather than acting as an actual villain or threat. And it bothers me so much when people just immediately write him off as Zorro beat him underwater, he wasn't strong, when beating a strong villain was at the fucking point of this arc. The crew just came back from training. We can't have them immediately run into difficulty in the first islands into the new world. So instead, let's shift the story to further talk about their previously established fish racism in ShAbOndY, and that's exactly what Fishman Island does. Fishman Island is such a great, albeit a bit on the nose commentary on the cyclical nature of racism and how it's perpetuated through blind hatred and fear, and how even if it's difficult to truly end the cycle, you have to be willing to put aside your own internal prejudices so that the seeds of the cycle aren't born anew, and instead you cultivate a better world for those who come after you. Did you really expect Hody to have a tragic backstory that justified what he does and show that, oh, actually it's okay to be racist sometimes? At least Fishman Island felt urgent. It may not have felt like a serious and deep threat because we just had a training arc, but it still felt like a threat that had to be addressed quickly. At least Fishman Island has a message. Long Ring Long Land is actually just sucking dog shit, and it's right before My Little Meow Meow Water⁷, and that makes me hate it even more. You want to talk about bad villains, just look at Foxy. My complaints about the arc though are how the crew meets up again after 2 years, only to then immediately split off into groups or go off alone on the first island they get to. Where Robin essentially just does fuck all for a majority of the arc, Zoro leaves, Frankie goes to the Sea Forest, and Brook meets Papagoo at the cafe before everyone else, and then Chopper and Sanji get separated from everyone else. I know they all had reasons, but as you can probably tell from my thoughts about time skip, it was really frustrating to see them all meet up only to immediately split up again, which is unfortunately a very common theme throughout time skip, but we'll get to that later. And a minor thing about this arc I really hate, the flashbacks to a few hours ago or moments ago in the middle of the action that happened in this arc. Like when Luffy and everyone come out of the shark and you can deduce what happened, but then for some fucking reason, right when the conflict starts, we have a flashback to when Luffy and Jinmbe made a plan, as if the plan didn't literally play out before our eyes right then and there. Or the other one, where one of Shirahoshi's brothers makes a call, and then it flashes back to him telling the border patrol to make an air bubble around the ship, only to then immediately explain that plan to Luffy. And then we flash back to the moment where Hody said humans didn't do anything to him, and then we get a flashback of Hody's childhood. It's way too many flashbacks, placed at really weird times for a lot of things that don't deserve flashbacks. And just one final nitpick, Luffy suddenly needing an urgent blood transfusion, despite that not ever being the case before or since this arc. Conveniently about how we all have the same blood was kind of dumb and obvious, but I still appreciate that it was used as a way to deliver the message. But besides those things, this is still a great arc. Not amazing, but great. The flashback with Koala is amazing, and I love the reveal that even though he was aquatic Malcolm X, that at heart, Fisher Tiger was still racist when he died and went out like a true gamer. Also, holy shit does this arc set up a lot of stuff that we still to this day don't have answers for. Like with the prediction about Luffy destroying an entire fucking island, what the promise Joy Guy made, and Shirahoshi being one of the ancient weapons, which, to further prove my point, this is a prime example of why I prefer not having answers to a lot of things about the Void Century in One Piece. Because goddamn, I wish I could accurately convey to you my disappointment when I realized that one of the ancient weapons was something as lame as the power to control Sea Kings, which not only feels like a devil fruit power, but Sea Kings just aren't powerful. Luffy beat one in the first fucking chapter, and that this ancient weapon was stored inside a whiny 16-year-old girl. Speaking of Shirahoshi, all I'm gonna say is, if we take into account how babies are made and birthed, and then look at Orihime and Neptune. But to conclude Fishman Island, people tend to say that this arc is one of the weakest in this series. What those people fail to remember is that this arc used Nami's theme for the first time since Oda's one-shot manga Wanted, which clearly puts it in the same level as Water⁷ and Marineford. Then there's Punk Hazard, which falls into that pre-time skip problem where it acts mostly as setup, and so it can't stand as its own story. Plus the fact that it's immediately followed by Dressrosa doesn't help either. And Punk Hazard did not deserve that absolute fucking banger of an opening. Like, holy shit, it is not even funny. That's honestly one of the biggest tragedies of One Piece, is that Hands Up was wasted on such a shit-ass, fuck-ass, who let bro cook-ass arc as Punk Hazard. To avoid spending any more time on this arc, good setup, bad villain, a lot of running, don't like Momo or Kinemon, Lost Ang looms like ASMR to me, and Zoro and Tashigi versus Monet was cool. Now on to Dressrosa, and Jesus fucking Christ, what an arc Dressrosa is. At this point, I am actually losing my mind making this video. Even people who don't watch One Piece know about Dressrosa. You could probably go ask your grandparents, oh hey, what do you think about Dressrosa? And they'd say, oh yeah, Dressrosa is mid. And honestly, I can't say I'd blame them. This arc suffers from something I've coined in my extensive research as too fucking much syndrome. There's too many characters, there's too many moving plot points being introduced and set up for later on, there's too many backstories, there's too many things to keep track of, and as a result, none of those things in particular really shine. There were so many characters in Dressrosa that I didn't even realize that Koala was the same girl that was in the Malcolm X flashback, because it came to a point where I just tuned out everyone except main characters, because I couldn't keep track anymore. So imagine my surprise going through Dressrosa for the first time when I completely brushed over all the Coliseum fighters, thinking they were all just one-note side characters, and also because I hate the Coliseum part so much. It went on for way too long. Only to realize later on that they became part of the Grand Fleet. Oh no, I'm gonna have to remember them. They're gonna be important later on. They're all gonna show up for a big battle near the end of the series, and I'm gonna feel absolutely nothing because they're all boring as shit. There's also Bobby Funk, who, if you're lucky enough not to remember, had the most cursed devil fruit of wearing people like a jacket and absorbing their powers. And I'm reminding you of that and showing you this image because if I have to be cursed with the knowledge of this a second time, then so do you. But the worst characters in this arc definitely have to be the Don Quixote family members. The Coliseum fighters were boring, but nothing beyond that. They were inoffensive. The Doflamingo family members are both boring and annoying as shit, because a majority of them fall victim to a massive flaw Oda has with characters, where they want to make all of them quirky in some way, and rather than just writing an interesting or fun character, they instead default to giving them some sort of speech tick, where they end every sentence with some wacky phrase, or they have some really specific, not funny recurring joke that they think they can make funny if they just repeat it enough and beat you over the head with it. For example, Lao G has the hilarious gag of being old and saying G a lot, and all his attacks involve the letter G. Buffalo has the most shit-eating voice and ends every sentence with Dasoyan. Treble laughs a lot and has a stuffy nose, and Senor Pink shares something in common with one of the worst Gintama episodes where he says hard-boiled every 3 fucking words. And you may ask yourself, how is any of this funny? Wouldn't this all get really annoying after 2 scenes of these characters? Dressrosa is also where my complaints of the crew splitting up post-time skip really begin to shine like Frankie's nipples, because at the very beginning of this arc, we already split the crew up into 3 groups. Law, Usopp, and Robin go to Greenbit, which by the way, in case you don't know, Greenbit was intended to be its own arc, and it just wasn't because there was already too much in Dressrosa. But anyway, Nami, Chopper, Brook, and Sanji stay back to protect the ship, and Frankie, Zoro, Luffy, and Kinemon go to dinner. But it can't be that simple, because the Straw Hats may be a great example of found family, but boy do they apparently hate each other, because then Zoro's sword gets stolen, and so he's out of the picture because he can't find shit. And then Sanji gets distracted with Viola, and then Luffy and Frankie interrogate a guy, which results in Luffy going to the Coliseum and Frankie disappearing. Which, by the way, this scene right here, this scene, the one you're looking at, this scene right here, was the second to last bit of dialogue directly between Luffy and Frankie for 6 real-world years. I am not making that up. From chapter 729 to 976, Luffy and Frankie did not speak a single word to each other. So now our 3 groups are split into having 6 different plots to follow with our main characters, and then half of them just kind of leave in the middle of the arc. And while we're talking about statistics, the half of the crew, you know, the Nami, Brook, Sanji, whatever, right? That half of the crew that left in Dressrosa are all completely absent from the story from chapter 730 to 795, which was a whole year and a half in real world time. How about another one? It took from the beginning of Punk Hazard in 2012 until the ending of Wano last year in 2022 for the crew to all be together on the ship without any extra members. In that time, we got Momo and Kinemon, Carrot, and then we split up for Whole Cake Island, and then had Pedro and Pickums. But going back to Dressrosa, another issue I have with this arc is that it is the 6th but not final time that we see the plot line of Luffy helping a princess take back their kingdom from an oppressive tyrant ruler. And as if that wasn't enough, why not have 2 stories of royalty meeting their long lost fathers in one arc that's already bloated with characters? And another thing I realized going back to the series is that Oda has used the plot device of medicine that helps you but only temporarily 3 times now. There was the tension hormones in Impel Down, Manchuri's Tears in Dressrosa, and then the miraculous medicine Chopper pulled out of his ass that brought Zoro back into the fight in Wano, which was probably the biggest cop-out I've ever seen, but we'll get to Wano in due time. And to end my critiques of Dressrosa, I have to talk about Sabo. I hate Sabo so much. I look at Sabo, right, and all I see besides his cool hat is a walking cop-out character. And it's a shame, because in the flashbacks to Luffy's childhood, I love this character. I love the idea of a kid who's trapped in nobility and wants to escape it by sailing the seas, and I found it really cool to see that mirrored later on with Oden and Wano. But there's 3 massive things that hold Sabo back as a character. The first one should be obvious. It's the fact that he's literally just a worse version of Ace. Sabo is the Ace your parents tell you that you have at home. Sabo is your friend's homework after they copy it, but change the answers so it isn't obvious. Sabo is the pictures corporate wants you to find the difference between. He serves the same purpose of stronger older brother, but the fact that he got Ace's devil fruit makes Sabo lose any sort of identity he could have had. And the reason I feel this way is because of how late into the story he got introduced. The first direct mentions of Sabo as a character were in Marineford when Ace said his name, and then a bit earlier in the arc where we see the whole sake cup thing, which this should summarize how I feel about that. And also the crossed out S in Ace's tattoo is Sabo's Jolly Roger. Yeah, he may have been planned for the whole story, but it doesn't eliminate the fact that we're introduced to him so late that it's simply impossible to feel for him. Then there's the fact that Sabo suffers from the 2 most annoying tropes in fiction, which are amnesia and, oh look, my shitty little pirate ship got fucking blown up, but don't worry, I survived. And this is definitely a nitpick, but I just hate the fact that Sabo uses the exact same pipe as a weapon even though he's 22. And the third and final reason that I hate Sabo is that Luffy barely spent any time with Sabo, so he feels more like some kid Luffy knew for a year as a child rather than an actual brother. Luffy and Ace knew and lived with each other for 7 years until Ace left, and that tied into the fact that we had established Ace as Luffy's one and only brother up until now makes Luffy's and our connection to Ace much deeper and significant, especially when we see him die in Marineford. We simply just have more emotions and time invested in Ace. Sabo being alive also diminishes Luffy being a PTSD-ridden mess in Marineford, since he made the promise to get stronger after seeing Sabo die. And first, we see him fail to keep that promise in Sabo Odi, then having him still not be strong enough to save Ace, and Luffy realizing that he's failed 3 times now to protect people that he loves is part of the reason why Ace's death affected him so much. I can't be too mad at Sabo though, because even if he's literally just died Ace, he did save us from having to spend any more time in the shit-ass Coliseum. But as for the positives in Dressrosa, Doflamingo, I mean, what an amazing villain. First there's a reason why this guy is essentially half the fanbase's entire personality and one of the most well-known anime villains. He's just as much of a mental and emotional villain as he is a ridiculously OP one. Just look at Bellamy. Even though Doflamingo clearly doesn't like him and made Bellamy kill his crew, Bellamy still wants his approval because Doflamingo manipulated and took advantage of Bellamy's emotions. I also love that even though Dolphy has a tragic backstory, it isn't used to make you feel bad for him, because Doflamingo was actually just born evil. Look at Corazon and Law. Corazon went through the exact same thing as Doflamingo, but ended up being the best dad in the series and took his traumatic past, and rather than harping on it and playing victim like Doflamingo, he used it as motivation to make sure nobody else turned out like Dolphy. I mean, yeah, Dolphy went through a lot of shit, but something has to already be seriously wrong upstairs for you to willingly murder your own father in the 5th grade. Also, I always forget how freakishly tall he is. He's the same height as a fucking basketball hoop in the NBA, and I don't care what anyone says, Dolphy won in this arc. He managed to destroy the entire island and was able to stand up to Gear 4th and got up perfectly fine. Meanwhile, Luffy's dumbass was essentially comatose for 10 minutes and had to rely on the Citizen Dressrosa to win. Luffy is so lucky that Doflamingo was an asshole and likes to slowly kill people, because if not for that, he could have easily ended Rebecca and Violet. Dolphy's dad was an idiot though. Imagine taking your entire family and being like, alright everyone, we're gonna live in the hood now, without doing any actual research or preparation beforehand, just for the sake of morals. He had the right idea, but he was a shit father since he really poorly handled attempting to help Doflamingo adjust to their new living situations. Him and Mjosgard both deserve a participation award. And I can't talk about Dressrosa without bringing up Wujitora. Just what an absolute god among men Wujitora is. You already know that when you see a blind guy in anime, he's gonna be ridiculously OP until the show. It's one of my favorite tropes because it's fucking hilarious, and boy, did Wujitora not disappoint. Not only does he have one of the coolest evil fruits, but that scene at the end of the arc where he gets on his knees and apologizes and then tells Akainu that if the government loses credibility for admitting fault, then they didn't have any in the first place. Bars. Actual bars. The fact that a Marine doing something as simple as having humility and admitting fault for the government failing someone is such a big deal in the world of One Piece, and also as a reader, only just goes to show how right he was here. All I want to say about Zo is shout out to Ryunosuke, he was a real one. So now we're going straight to Whole Cake Island, which is also one of my least favorite arcs. Let me list off the positives first though. Brook was finally useful in his entire time in the crew, the Katakuri fight was great, and the Soul Pocus song / scene in the anime was beautiful. Seriously, Soul Pocus is an absolutely gorgeous song. Also, this scene is hilarious. But the Katakuri fight went on for a bit too long, and the anime played Soul Pocus twice, which detracted from its initial emotional impact and value. With that out of the way, let's talk about Sanji and Whole Cake Island, because he's the main focus of this arc. Sanji is so important that he gets not one, but 2 trauma dump arcs. And man, is the one in this arc so much worse than his original story. Is Oda okay? Does he have some unresolved shit to talk about with his parents? Because every time he writes a backstory involving a parent, they're either absent, dead, dying, or complete assholes. And maybe it's because I'd already told Sanji's original backstory, or how comically fucked up his childhood was, but I felt absolutely nothing. His family, other than Reiju and his mom, are just completely one-dimensional assholes for all their screen time, who do nothing but spend their time looking for any chance they can get to beat up Sanji. Son, you aren't a genetically modified super soldier and want to have hobbies, so I'm going to fake your death and say you aren't my son, and then throw you in a dungeon and put an iron mask on you. We don't cook in this snail-fueled monarchy, son. What are you, some sort of dirty femoid? You gonna go use Vagisil to treat those wounds your brothers gave you? You gonna mourn your dead mom like a little pussy? And something about this friend judge faking Sanji's death with his big-ass podium and his giant stupid picture of Sanji is so funny to me. Actually, hold on, I have an idea. There we go. I appreciated the small redemption his brothers got later on when they helped save him and Luffy, but that just wasn't enough for me to feel invested in them. Whole Cake touches on a really complex topic of family trauma and abuse, showing how it's passed down to children and seeing their different reactions to it, with the Big Mom Pirates and Germa's 66 literally just being exact mirrors of each other. And then there's Beji in the middle of this, with his stupid fucking mustache, being one of the 3 decent biological fathers in this series. Big Mom and Judge are case examples of living vicariously through your your children. Judge wants his children to be strong and emotionless soldiers because if I had to guess, in my limited knowledge of psychology, it's probably because deep down he's actually insecure about himself since he's just a regular human and doesn't think he's good enough, so he wants his children to be even better than him, even if it involves throwing them in the dungeon. Big Mom uses her children as nothing more than a means to an end of having a massive family, not even because she actually wants to love them, but purely because she didn't have that as a child and so she can become the king of the pirates. Katakuri, Pudding, and Sanji all have their own barriers up from the way they were raised. Katakuri constantly feels the need to be strong for his siblings, even though he doesn't want to. Pudding constantly got told that she was ugly, so she ended up being evil when deep down, she was just a victim of her circumstances. And Sanji got called a pussy for wanting to have hobbies, and over the course of the arc, they all come to terms with that trauma in different ways. And that theme of family trauma and how people process it was a part of Whole Cake Island that I actually really enjoyed. And I wish was the center focus of the arc, rather than spending 30 episodes and chapters having Big Mom yell about smegma, or Luffy and Nami running through a forest. A lot of the intended emotional moments in this arc just ended up feeling like they were trying too hard to get a reaction, which is odd because this is the only arc in the series where I had this feeling. Every time I saw one, it felt like Oda was sitting next to me and nudging me with his elbow and going, yeah, you see that? Isn't that sad? Such as near the beginning, where the crew doesn't have a cook and complain about being hungry, and then Luffy attempts to cook something and fails and nearly ends up dying, even though he's proven himself competent enough to survive on a dangerous island by himself for 6 months and spend his entire childhood in the jungle. But conveniently, now that Sanji's gone, he's helpless. Then there's the moments later on where Luffy eats Sanji's messed up food and then says the exact same words his mom said, and he also coincidentally gave her his food that got messed up in the rain. And then when Judge feels the need to call Sanji a waste of sperm even more despite him saving Judge's life, Luffy turns around and says, why are you listing off all the good things about him? All those moments to me felt like a fanfic attempt at a One Piece moment, and they're the only moments like that in the series for me, which is weird because I love the moment immediately after Luffy eats Sanji's food where Luffy punches Sanji and tells him to say what he really feels, and the scene of Sanji attempting to light his cigarette in the rain, and the scene of Sanji saving his family where they're forced to realize that even though they've pushed down their emotions and did all the things their dad said would make them strong, they had to rely on a quote-unquote failure like Sanji who wants to have hobbies to save them. Those moments I enjoyed, but everything else, nothing. I was a complete stone wall. And I'm gonna be honest, Pedro seemed a little too willing to sacrifice himself for Luffy. He spent 3 minutes with Luffy, and when they ran into the smallest bit of trouble, this dude decided to bust out a fucking sausage link of dynamite and blow himself up. I really think bro has just given up by that point and only went back to Whole Cake because he was looking for the first chance he could get to kill himself. Pedro had the motivation and the method. All he needed was a service level reason to justify it so that nobody would know he was actually mentally ill. The fact that Lollipop survived the explosion pissed me off to no end, since his only purpose after that point was to act as motivation for Carrot and Wanda and Wano, only for them to both get beaten in their furry Super Saiyan forms. Another thing as well that I hate the fake outs in Whole Cake Island, such as Nami looking at the wave and saying, Luffy, I think this is the end, and then Jinmbe getting them through the wave, or the ship sinking and the Jolly Roger floating to the surface, only to reveal that it was swallowed by the baby man. They were small moments, but they annoyed me. One Piece has been going on for 20 fucking years. It is the best-selling comic and manga of all time. You are one of the best-selling fiction authors of all time. Why are you resorting to cheap cliffhangers like this is some seasonal anime that's attempting to bring in new viewers by any means necessary? The characters introduced in Whole Cake besides Reiju, I didn't care for either. Beji and his crew were really boring. Pudding went from being stereotypically perfect shy girl to evil and actually interesting, then back to stereotypically perfect shy girl. But it's okay, because sometimes she accidentally switches to being mean, and it's always really funny, especially the 15th time it happens. I also find it weird how having a third eye and a weird mouth resulted in her and Katakuri getting bullied as children when they live in the most racially diverse kingdom in the world. I may live in a land where it snows cotton candy and there's talking furniture and fish people, but god damn it, my deeply rooted internal prejudices draws a line of 3 eyes. That shit is just too weird. And as for Big Mom herself, you can probably fucking guess it. I've said it so many times, but I'll say it again because this is the case with a lot of One Piece villains. She's just too dumb of a character for me to perceive her as a legitimate threat. Our first introduction to the power of an emperor, and her one personality trait, besides being strong, is the hunger pangs she gets, which end up reducing whatever arc she's into nothing but her saying the name of a food for 150 chapters. Ooh, croquembouche. Ooh, smegma. Wedding cakey da. Oh my god, shut the fuck up. It doesn't help that way too much of this arc is the crew running away from her after the assassination attempt failed, as she says nothing but wedding cakey. But to wrap up Whole Cake, I'm trying to get me some of that stussy, you know what I'm saying? So, does anyone understand what the fuck this was about? And now we're finally at Wano, which is something I thought would never happen when I started this series and this script. Wano was the arc that was going on when I first started One Piece, so I've essentially been hearing about it for the last 2 years whenever I look up anything about One Piece. However, there's a lot of small things in Wano that ended up dragging it down and made this arc miss its full potential. For one, there's the fact that a majority of this arc is simply just a lot of setup for the raid, and so we end up getting the introduction and backstory for a lot of side characters that just aren't interesting. The biggest offenders of this being the 9 Red Scabbards. For all the attempted development and build-up they were given as being the 9 strongest samurai in Wano, and the key force behind a prophecy that would overthrow Orochi, which, by the way, I also really don't enjoy the idea of prophecy in this world, but anyway, man, did the 9 Red Scabbards end up feeling very weak and one-dimensional while also somehow having way too much screen time. And so, despite this being their personal fight for their country that they've been planning for 20 years, it ends up just feeling like the Straw Hats and others versus Kaido. The fake out deaths in the raid also bothered me, since Kiemon and Kiku had these dramatic deaths that I really enjoyed when I first saw them, but nope, turns out they survived because apparently Law's Devil Fruit is now permanent, even though we've literally never seen it happen before. And the 2 members that do end up dying feel more like Oda wanted to make something impactful, but didn't want to kill actually important characters because that'd be too impactful. So let's just off-screen kill Ashura and, I don't know, fucking Izo. Yeah, why not? Who cares? I wish Kiemon would have died. This is our first time properly taking on not 1, but 2 of the strongest pirates in the world, and the only consequence of our actions was the death of 2 side characters no one cares about. Speaking of emperors, Kaido. He is the biggest letdown of a villain in the entire series, with the most uninteresting pirate crew to go with him. When Kaido was first shown jumping off a sky island to commit suicide and being disappointed when he failed, I got the impression that he was going to be a One Piece version of One Punch Man, where he's so strong that he's bored of essentially everything because nothing feels like a challenge anymore and he isn't satisfied. Then we got the scene of him apologizing when Higurashi distracted Odin in the middle of their fight, and him killing a CP0 agent that interrupted his fight with Luffy. So again, I was excited to see his backstory that led to him being suicidal and why he was so honorable, but instead we get a rushed backstory that doesn't even explain anything about his Oni race and shows that, yeah, he just wants to be strong because he thinks that being strong is the only important thing in the world. Bro watched Fight Club one too many times. I wanted to see so much more character to him since we've established that he's strong. Being a brick wall bullet sponge isn't an interesting character trait. I wanted more to him other than a laugh that sounds like a motorcycle starting. If I could rewrite One Piece, I would make it so that Luffy would actually face Big Mom in Wano to become an emperor. Because even if she's boring as shit, her and Luffy have had personal conflict since Fishman Island, and he even promised Katakuri that he'd beat her. And instead of Luffy, the 9 Red Scabbards and Kid and Law beat Kaido. But at the end of the day, you can say all you want about Kaido, but at least he respected Yamato's pronouns. Speaking of Yamato, with how much I'd seen her practically everywhere, I figured she played a massive role in this arc. I always saw everyone saying that she was going to be the next crew member, that she saved the raid, and I figured with such a good design, she had to be important. But no, Yamato shows up 74 chapters into Wano, stalls Kaido for a bit, and then at the end of the arc in chapter 1056, Yamato says that she's going to join Luffy, and then literally after a single page in the next chapter, she says that she isn't, which is like legitimately, what was the point of that? She also constantly talks about going out to sea throughout her time in the arc, and even basically tells the crew that she's joining them, and has a contrived connection to Ace to make us care about her more, but then at the end of all of that, she still doesn't join, which I was more than fine with, by the way, because she didn't feel like she deserved to join the crew since Yamato has essentially nothing going for her other than her design. But it's just frustrating as a reader to see the author flat out say that something is going to happen, only to take it back a chapter later. And the whole thing with her saying that she's Odin honestly just came off as extremely uncomfortable. Oda really likes the trope of having a character do ridiculous things and then justifying them later on and plot twist you. For example, like when everyone laughed at Yasuo's death, turned out it was because they couldn't do anything else since they were robbed of emotions. When Odin danced in his underwear for 4 years, you think, man, what a pussy. But it turns out he was doing it for his country. And when you see Senior Pink's stupid ass and think, what a weirdo, and you think, wow, people really overhyped this. Like, he isn't a good person. I don't give a shit if he takes care of his dying wife. He's still allied with one of the worst pirates in the series. He isn't a good person. I was expecting Yamato to get a moment like that, but she didn't. And so she's just this hyper obsessed cosplayer that tells someone she is their dead father. It is just fucking weird. I know she admired Odin because he was free, and I mean, so do I. Like, that scene where he leaves home for 4 years and then only returns for a few hours, I want to be like that. I want to do that. But it's weird to say that you are him, and it's extra weird to say that to his son. Also, if we take a look at Odin and then Hiyori and take into account how babies are made, had Yamato been shown throughout the arc rather than suddenly appearing during the raid and didn't mention any of this shit about wanting to join the crew, then I wouldn't have minded her nearly as much. On the topic of absent characters, let's bring up Jinmbe. You may have noticed I haven't discussed him at all in previous arcs, even though he's been incredibly useful and has been directly mentioned as far back as Arlong Park. And that's because his relationship with the crew is so on and off that even though he's part of them now, I just simply feel nothing because of how absent he is for a lot of the story. He helped Luffy in his darkest moment at Marineford. He helped Luffy fight Hoodie Jones and donated blood to him in Fisherman Island. He saved the ship in Whole Cake Island, but he still doesn't feel important because every time he's showing up for like 10 years now, it's just him saying, I can't join your crew yet, and then he gets forgotten until we get another moment exactly like that last one. I say this after talking about Yamato because she didn't show up until 74 chapters into this arc, and with Jinmbe, nobody on the crew even bothered to stop and ask where he was until 2 days before the raid. They had 2 weeks of setup where there was enough time to make a plan, have the plan get compromised, and then make a whole other plan before anyone bothered to stop and ask, hey, where's this crew member? The weirdest part about that is that the whole reason Jinmbe wasn't there was so he could stay behind and fight Big Mom. But Big Mom left Whole Cake Island and followed Luffy immediately after he left for Wano. So what the fuck was Jinmbe off doing for 2 weeks that was so urgent? It does not take 2 weeks to say goodbye to your old pirate crew. Also, I just quickly want to mention, we never see the crew talk to each other about Whole Cake Island, which again feels like a very key character moment that should have happened in Wano. Why did nobody ask what happened when they went to get Sanji back when there was a whole arc where they were all sitting around with furries saying fucking Garchu, complaining about how he just let them without notice? There were actually quite a few character moments that were missing in Wano, such as essentially anything to do with Zoro. We did finally get to see a fight with him post Timeskip where he was fully pushed to his limit and wasn't ridiculously stronger than his opponent, and I really enjoyed the little side story that was going on with him being a Ronin and saving Hiyori, but I wanted just a bit more from him in Wano. I know the focus of this arc is with the Red Scabbards and Momo being Shogun, but how can you have your character who's a swordsman go to the land of the samurai and just give him a new strong sword with no further development of him as a character? And instead of anything involving Zoro, we got, the person who made his sword is actually the father of the guy who taught Zoro that was last mentioned 1,000 chapters ago, and it's like, great, yeah, no, that's exactly what I wanted, thanks man. Which is a massive cop-out because in Wano, Kawamatsu and Hyogoro say that Zoro looks identical to this guy who used to rule Ringo and that Zoro even uses the same sword technique. But that guy isn't closely related to Zoro because that's actually Zoro's great uncle, which who the fuck looks and acts identical to their great uncle, but whatever. Because Zoro's actual mom and dad are both dead, and his grandma on his dad's side is actually a direct descendant of Ryuma and the sister of the guy who founded Zoro's village and gave him his sword, meaning that Zoro's sword instructor was actually his uncle the whole time, meaning that Kuina is his second cousin and Zoro is a direct descendant of Ryuma. And where is all of this vital character information revealed? In SBS and nowhere in Wano itself. What the fuck kind of storytelling is that where you explain critical information about a character and change the entire dynamic of one of his most important relationship when answering a reader submitted question rather than the main story being told? Which, to add insult to injury, we don't even get this scene of Zoro visiting Ryuma's grave like he said he was gonna do. So any sort of development Zoro could have gotten in Wano was info dumped in an SBS, and the one thing pertaining to his family that he's had with him for over 2 years doesn't get shown and is most likely going to get used as a flashback later on. But at the very least, at least Wano gave us Zoro's, Nami's, and Robin's best outfits today. I mean, holy shit, the drip here is immaculate. Another example of lacking character moments is how Luffy and Marco had barely any dialogue between them. We get introduced to two new characters who knew Ace, and we made a big deal about that, but the person who sailed with Ace and fought alongside Luffy in Marineford? Nah. Why should Luffy and him have a moment together? The section that Luffy spent in Udon prison was really dragged out as well. I like Luffy's speech to the prisoners in Udon, where he shoulders the pain of the virus and hugs them all because he knows that they're suffering, as a way of saying, I know what you're all going through, but I'm gonna take the worst of it and be Kaido. That was a powerful ass moment. But other than that, yeah, this portion of the story sucks, especially the part where Big Mom shows up with amnesia. That whole plotline itself was contrived, but you telling me that pre-timeskip Luffy can break in and out of the world's most secure prison, but apparently need Big Mom's Flintstone amnesia ass to come rocking up talking about Oshiruko to escape Kaido's concentration camp. The other thing I disliked about Wano is that this is now the 7th time we've seen the plot of Luffy helping royalty overthrow someone took over their island, but then being unable to stay for too long because they're pirates and to make the kingdom look bad. He's had this in Alrabasta, Drum Island, Fishman Island, Dressrosa, Skypieeiaugh, and now Wano. And you know what? I'm gonna say it. I'm kind of tired of it. The raid itself was fine, and we got plenty of great moments, such as Robin's first 1v1 since fucking Skypieeiaugh, Brooke and Frankie finally doing something together, Sanji getting a massive power-up that actually sided to him as a character, and Chopper essentially saving the raid, even though he just didn't bother with the smile victims. And I also really enjoyed this small moment between Brooke and Robin, where Robin comments that Brooke seemed used to illusions. Again, I want more of that side of Brooke. Give me a depressed skeleton instead of a horny skeleton, and I'll be on my way. Robin's 1v1 was amazing too, not because of the fight itself, but because it acted as a vehicle for giving her and Sanji amazing character development, where Sanji finally asks for help and Robin gladly comes to his rescue since she's finally with people who not only make her feel wanted, but she's comfortable enough with to truly let out her dark side for the sake of protecting. Other than Luffy, Sanji, and Zoro, the crew all need more 1v1 fights that also act as character development for them, rather than being a pure spectacle. Even Nami got time to shine on the raid when she let out her inner Luffy and challenged Ulti without hesitation and beat her in one shot. Also, God, Zoro fucking one-shotting Apu was so satisfying. I hate his character. And as for Gear 5th, I can't brush past it. It eliminated a key part of Luffy's character that I enjoyed, which is that he had this shit-ass devil fruit, but still managed to make it work by being creative with its application. So to see that he actually has this ridiculously powerful mythical Zoan fruit that allows him to do whatever he wants and also turns him into fucking Monkey D. Goofy with all the cartoony attacks took away a big part of his character for me. I especially hate that fucking panel where Kaido says it's like something out of a comic strip. Kaido is a fucking dragon weapons dealer who took over a country and uses slave labor camps. Why does he know what a comic book is? What, is he over here reading comic books when he isn't busy ruling a country or attempting suicide? That was such a stupidly out of character line for him. And the ending of Wano felt like a massive cop-out since all of a sudden, Shinobu's devil fruit that was shown only to make things rot up until this point suddenly ages up Momonosuke 20 years. You know what? Okay, yeah, sure, why not? Then there's Ryokuju, who is the one new admiral we haven't seen at all post-timeskip and was built up to be really threatening only for his very first scene to be him attacking people after they're weakened from a battle and still losing with his lame-ass devil fruit because Shanks telepathically yelled at him. There's admirals with the power of light itself and gravity, and your power is fucking nature. As for that scene with Shanks, I forgot Usopp even had a dad up until Wano. And holy shit, is Usopp one of the worst dads in this entire series. Usopp flat out abandoned his dying wife and child just so he could go adventuring with his friends on an island that was right next door for over a year with Shanks, constantly talking about how badly he missed Usopp and wanted to see him. Like, motherfucker, he's across the street, just go there. Dragon may have abandoned Luffy, but at least he had a reason since he was a wanted criminal and that would have put Luffy in danger. And he still checked in on Luffy and saved him in Logtown. But Usopp is just a fucking coward. To close out Wano, again, it gave us Nami and Robin's best outfit, and also in the anime, it is absolutely amazing at times, and it makes me sad that we can't have every episode be of the same level of quality as 1015. I mean, holy shit, the emotion and animation in the episode is so good, and there's still people saying, there's no moment in the manga I'd rather experience than the anime. I've literally seen people say that they don't like the walk to Arlong Park because it's filler and anime padding. Like, are you okay? Do you need a hug, bro? Show me on the doll where Dressrosa touched you. And that concludes my thoughts on One Piece. I'd like to reiterate that everything stated is my opinion, and if you disagree, then that's fine. If I didn't mention a particular moment that you enjoy, it's most likely because I didn't have anything of note to add to it, because the moment spoke for itself, or it didn't stick out to me as much. I have had an absolute blast making this video, or at least that's what I'll gaslight myself into believing, to justify how much time it took to go back through this series and jog my memory on what happened in every arc so I didn't miss anything. Even if some points come off negatively, I do still love parts of One Piece, and the fact that even after 20 something years and in the modern age of entire movies getting leaked before they even come out and spoilers, One Piece is one of the few things that's remained a mystery for its whole runtime, and everything surrounding it is one of the closest guarded secrets probably in all of media. I mean, look at GTA 6, even that of all things got leaked online before it came out with a fucking Amazon Fire Stick. But with One Piece, nobody knows anything about the endgame of One Piece other than Oda himself. And I know there's a lot of theories regarding One Piece, some of which are just fucking stupid, like Crocodile being Luffy's mom, but all I'll say is, personally, I believe that the end of the story is gonna have something to do with space or the moon. But with the celestial, let me repeat that, celestial dragon literally just wearing spacesuits, and the Lunarians and sun gods. We've already gotten confirmation that 3 races of people used to live on the moon, with the Birkins, Lunarians, and Skypieeiaugh. Plus the moon controls ocean tides. Not that real world logic really applies to One Piece. I mean, they communicate using telepathic snails and milk can heal your bones, but that's just my personal theory. And what is my source for this? That's right, I made it the fuck up. De Gozaru.
Suavemente.